So, boom, this is another episode of TTM Chat. We've got a very, very sick DJ in the house. We've got SYMATIC in the house, and there's not that many DJs in the world that I actually study on my own. Like, and Cy is actually one of those turntablists.
Oh,
So yeah, we've got him in the house today. So what's up, man?
yeah. What's up, man? Thanks for having me.
All right,
See
right.
you.
It's great to have you. All
Yeah.
right, yeah. So tell me about your path as a DJ. Like, what got you into DJing and your influences?
Uh, well, I guess like since I was a kid, I always like messing with sound and like recording stuff onto tape and messing with it and trying to figure out how the music that I was like growing up listening to, like the Prodigy and stuff like that, was like how it was made. Like I kind of knew what samples were and gradually trying to piece all of that together, and then like finding out about for me DJing meant turntablist DJing from
Mm.
the beginning. I
Oh
always
wow,
sort of
from the
pictured
beginning. That's dope.
the guy doing stuff with the decks, and like that
Mm.
was why you were doing that, because I guess maybe I kind of knew that you could do an edit, but DJing was like doing it for real. And then
Mm-hmm.
and so I was always just chasing, like trying to find out about that. And there was a lot on hand, I guess, in when I was a kid growing up in Bristol. There's quite a lot of music going on in this city, and it wasn't too difficult to kind of find sort of interesting stuff that was going on, and like hearing about scratching and the hip hop scene and stuff like that, and trying to learn about it. Um,
Wow, that's really
and
cool.
graffiti as well. Like I was sort of more into graffiti first,
Mm.
and then got into the scratching as a result of that, really. Um, and then parallel to that, I'd also was just like really into records.
Oh,
Like, like my parents had records, and I'd dig through them and sneak them onto the turntable and try and scratch on this like a stack system, and I had to like reach into it and try and scratch that and get shouted at by my parents. But like gradually I like pieced it together of like who was what was what, and who was doing it. Eventually heard about like Qbert and Mixmaster Mike. Probably Mixmaster Mike first, with like
mm-hmm.
Beast Boys. Like 3M Season 1 DJ was
Nice.
just such an incredible thing to me, of like watching that happen and just being like, that's incredible, that he's actually making that song out of a record, out of one record, and it was just like utterly incredible. And with the MCing and stuff, the way that they put it all together, and I was just like, I was really into the videos, and I just was like, all of that, the editing, the sounds, chopping up sounds, messing with them. So yeah, man, that's kind
Yeah.
of what got me into it. And like so yeah, by the time I figured out who like Qbert and that were, I was gradually going onto that kind of path and following them. But I was picking up kind of a bit later than a lot of heads, like I was only getting into it
Like
sort of
what
really when I
years?
was like, well, when I got like properly, when I
Mm-hmm.
restarted understanding it and like actually had mates who had decks and I could actually practice, that was when I was probably sort of 17, 18 kind of
Mm-hmm.
age. Before that, like I could imagine what it was, but I didn't have a clue like what it meant. I thought that you could filter out, just with the three EQ knobs. I thought it was like voice, backing track, horns.
Mm.
So I thought you had whole sections of the song that you could just chop out with it, like
Oh
stems or
wow.
something,
Uh-huh.
like but it's funny because like gradually the technology's kind of caught up and almost become that, which is kind of cool. But
Yeah, because wasn't Native Instruments kind of working on something like that, where it's like a
yeah,
audio file where it had the stems in it or something where you could.
they had a thing called stems, and yeah, I think you play on your DVS, you'd play
Uh,
it, and then you had access to all four channels, and you could kind of,
mm,
if you had the right kit, because you could have their mixers, you could be kind of modular, couldn't you? You could have like a mixer part, and then have like triggers and effects and stuff, and have it all
and like
plugged in.
acapellas or being able to solo stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's it. Like my
I used
cousin
to
had
find
it.
it really
Like
good.
he used to have like a real skinny mixer. It was like an Eclat Nuo, the
Mm-hmm.
real skinny ones. And then either side of it, he had tractor like modular.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what they were called, but like they were you know, like one for pads, one for sort of re-triggering, and he had like little extra faders and stuff that were all hooked up to the software. Really, really flexible. But obviously it's all running off of a laptop. And for me, like the laptop thing has always been like a bit of a something that distracts me a little bit. And I've always found that I prefer the analog side of things. It's partly just like nerdy fascination with it and how it all works and stuff like that. I also kind of find myself distracted when I'm using Serato for like gigs or whatever like that. So there's definitely something that I really like about the analog side of things.
Dope. And my question is, when you heard 3 MCs and 1 DJ, was that around the time that it came out, or this is much later? Like what years around?
When did that even come out? I mean, this was like end of the 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah,
when I was really paying attention. You know, and as a little kid, I'd sort of heard about like rave and like hip hop and stuff like that, but I hadn't really put it all together or understood it very much. And it was bands like that, you know, realizing that Beastie Boys had been sampled by Prodigy, and I really liked the Prodigy, and like, okay, these are samples, and then I'd like look into that and discover what the aim and break was, and what funky drummer was, and all right, so James Brown, that's why everyone loves James Brown, you know, like all these little connections. And I've always loved that, you know, like what did the, you know, the sort of reward that you get from digging from one artist to the next. You're like, okay, so that guy sampled that guy, and then like that became all of this, and that was like, oh, you learn about, you know, Stacks, all the artists on Stacks, and you know what I mean, like it's all like a big network. I find that sort of thing fascinating.
Dope. And you're coming out of Bristol, so what were you into trip hop, or were you just not into the slower stuff? Or
oh no, definitely, like that stuff was definitely some of the earlier stuff that I was hearing. Yeah, I remember Portishead, Dummy, and Massive Attack. They were, and the fact that they were from Bristol, you know, you were kind of proud of that, being like, yeah, we're like, people know about Bristol. You know, like Ronnie Size as well, you know, like super legendary people. And then you kind of piece it all together and see and hear these people, like your mate knows them, or like you go and you'd meet them in a place and it was real, you know. They were real people.
So when you started DJing, you started with the intention to scratch, like you weren't dropping jungle or
the scratching was definitely like the priority. Whatever I was going to end up doing, it was like using the turntables as a tool was the main thing. And then, you know, like, and then I heard like people like Kid Koala and stuff that were like being really musical with it. It was just amazing. And then I was kind of a little bit late to the game with the actual sort of turntablist scene, you know, like I kind of knew that it existed and stuff, but I wasn't really connected to anything. And I was very like internet shy in the early days of the internet. And it took me a while to kind of catch up, I guess. So like when things like, you know, like Phantasmagoria that came out, re-released recently, awesome album. But when that first came out, I was kind of only in the early stages of really getting into scratching and turntablism. So I wasn't like there yet of like knowing about that side of the scene. And then hearing about it maybe 2 or 3 years later and gradually, you know, being like, oh, right, okay, so like piecing all these things together, D-Stars and the West Coast and like all of this other like Beat Junkies, like linking it all together. That was like me, those early 2000 years was me like getting into it. And then I was trying to play catch up with those few years for like the next few years, you know, like whilst there was loads of other dope stuff going on, you know, like by the time mid 2000s came around, I was like starting to link up with the sort of Scratch Sunday lot and the community scratch lot.
Oh wow.
And realizing what was, you know, that there was active stuff happening now, you know, I hadn't just missed it all, which was that was kind of my fear at that sort of time, was that I'd like missed the best of it kind of thing. I was like, oh no, you know, I'm still into it, but it's like there's not this awesome scene that there seemed to have used to be. But then it kind of just lulled a bit, it feels, and now it seems to be really, really bustling again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But anyway, you asked me like what my first stuff was. I like that was ages ago. Sorry, I kind of answered
yeah, it's like your influences, like like DJs, you know, like DJs that you were looking up to. You were mentioning, you know, Kid Koala and stuff like that, like Drunken Trumpet. That's so amazing that like that's one of my favorite pieces of all times, you know.
Absolutely, man. Like that was just unreal. And and yeah, he was on Ninja Tune as well. And Ninja Tune was like a label that I was really paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Beats and Pieces by Cold Cut
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like a big introduction to like sampling for me, and like finding out what all those noises were. Do you know the tune I mean?
Yeah, those guys are legends, you know,
Like
like
that.
especially with the video stuff too, like the
Yeah,
video
exactly.
DJing. Did you ever see them live and do the video stuff with the I know they had the Jungle Book and they were like scratching the Jungle Book.
They had, yeah, they were well ahead of the game. You know, they were doing that stuff like I think you know early '90s, maybe '80s.
Yeah.
You know, like they were doing really cool stuff. And I used to, you know, I was so into like visual stuff and like animation and stuff like
Mm.
that. So I was really tuned into you know what they were doing because of that. It was like a whole visual and audio thing, and like they were all
Mm.
about good quality and show, and like the records were awesome as well. The records always had like a lot of Ninja Tune releases had like tools at the end of the release,
Oh wow, I didn't know
just a
that.
standard. They do that like you know they most of the singles would have acapellas, but you'd also get like bonus
Mm.
beats, or you get like a section of scratches that were in the song or something like that. Really cool idea, and I was like, man, that's totally what the you know in my head I was just like that's what it should be. Is that's like you know the DJ can deconstruct the songs if he wants and make his own versions of them. Like,
Sick,
um,
yeah.
I think that was it kind of frustrated me when I realized that like a lot of songs got released without all the components. You know, like
Right,
you can
acapellas and
just have
stuff, right?
acapellas for everything. You know, like unless you had connections to studios or whatever. But like yeah, when I realized that it wasn't as easy as that, I was like, damn. Like,
Right. Yeah, and what
um,
about the graffiti? Because you're saying you started in the graffiti. So who are some of your graffiti inspirations?
well, it's just a lot of cool stuff going on in Bristol at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The drum and bass scene, the hip hop scene, the graffiti scene were all really just standard. They were everywhere, you know, like when I was a
Mm-hmm.
kid. And with skating as well, like everyone was into skating and stuff, and they all just sort of went hand in hand. Um, and you kind of learned about a lot of it by default, you know, like you didn't. That was a bit like with jungle and stuff, you know, like I don't memorize all the track names or anything like that. Lots of
Mm-hmm.
people, oh, you must know this tune and this label. I'm just like, most of the time I don't. Like, I just
Right,
know the
right.
songs from like mixes and like tapes and things like that you'd heard it all as one big thing, you know. Like, I never really paid that closer attention to it in that way. In the way now that I'm like checking labels and whatever and
Mm-hmm.
nerdy with it. Um, but yeah, it was all kind of one big kind of cultural thing, I think. So like, you just heard about all these things, and it was the graffiti was the visual side of it, and the drum and bass and the hip hop was like the sound, and um, but like luckily I heard lots of different types of music as well, because like you know brothers and sisters are like, into different things, and friends that had like access to like cool. You know, I had a mate who's like dad was like super into jazz and stuff. They had like a bit of a sort of ramshackle studio at their house, and
Mm-hmm.
like so sort of seeing a little bit about how music was made and recorded and stuff was really interesting to me.
Mm.
But
Dope.
eventually I got to like I got my first ever job like after school
Mm-hmm.
was like I got it through my girlfriend who's now my wife actually, but like she is from Kenya, and her mum hooked us up with our first job basically in Kenya,
Oh wow.
and it was working on like this. It's like a campsite for NGOs to like go in. Like at the time, Sudan was like there was like a war going on in Sudan,
Mm.
like South Sudan. They were like breaking away
Mm-hmm.
from
North and
Sudan.
south here.
Yeah, so like there was like a campsite right on the edge of the border where all
Mm.
the NGOs could be, but they weren't allowed to like stay in Sudan. They had to like fly over every night
Wow.
with like
Mm-hmm.
supplies and like go and drop food and fucking try and
Mm-hmm.
solve the fucking horrible problem that was going on at the time. And we were just like looking after we were at the camp that was like looking after these guys, you know, that they
Mm-hmm.
needed to come back from flying, or there was just like an airstrip, and like they just needed to come back and chill for a bit. So I was like literally like running these guys movies and DJing for them, and like we were running the bars, and you know the guys R&R time when they're coming back from doing all this wild stuff over the border, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
so like every couple of weeks we'd have like this big disco, and I ended up DJing there. I had no idea what I was doing, you know, and two portable CD players plugged into this amp that was just like on fire a lot of the time. Just like, it was just
wow.
like, all the connections were falling apart. I had to learn. I didn't know what any of them were. Like, I just had to figure it out with the help from the guys that kind of knew about it. And like, we sort of gradually make connections with the wires, and hopefully it didn't electrocute us, kind of thing. Like
those old school CD ones that like opened up like that.
Yeah, like that. We had to. They didn't even have them. Like those were mine and my girlfriend's CD players. We used to like I plugged them in, and then I had to like
the Walkmans, the CD Walkmans.
Yeah, the CD Walkman, exactly. Yeah, two of them, and then like and I had no idea what I was doing. You know, I was like, oh, cool, I'm gonna show off all my cool music, like fucking Aphex Twin and stuff. And I'm like, Aphex Twin in this like campsite in the middle of Kenya is just like not the one. And people looking at me like, man, it was a baptism of a fire, because people were like so taking their party time seriously, if you know what I mean. Like, it was so valuable. And like yeah, it's just funny. I have this guy, this English kid, like trying to DJ and trying to play all these like completely wrong tunes. Like, people would be like really vocal about it, just be like, what are you doing, kind of thing. Gradually I got some help from people, and they were like telling me which tunes to play and like how to, you know, what local guys like and stuff like that. But I'm playing like loads of this music's in like other language, like African languages, you know, Swahili and or like the Nigerian languages. Like, you know, I had no idea what I was playing, and like gradually had to like piece it together, because you play one tune and people are like, oh cool, good reaction, just play another random song and people are just like, what are you doing, man? So it was like a real like learning experience. It was hard, and I gradually pieced it together. And the thing that like brought it all together was doing like reggae. Like, most people just were super into reggae, and I loved reggae. I always like grew up listening to my dad's reggae collection, and like dub and stuff were like some of the first records that I picked up and really paid attention to. Listened to all the effects and stuff like that was what I really liked. The fact that you could tell, like in dub tracks, you could tell that they were like breaking the song apart, you know, like you could hear it was a recording, but they were like fucking with it. So was that just like a summer, or you lived out there for a couple of years, or? Yeah, no, we were there for like 6 months.
Oh, nice.
So it was kind of, you know, a longish time. Definitely amazing experience, and like just such a completely different world, you know, and like coming back to England was like very different all of a sudden. Wow. And then I went off to like college, and like when I went to art college, but I lived with like all people from the music college.
Oh, okay.
So I learned loads, and I moved in with DJs. Like, we were all DJs in this house, and like just I learned more about music than I did about anything to do with my art course. Like, totally. And we were like putting on nights and stuff, and DJing, and I was trying to find other scratches, you know, like it was so slow for me. I still hadn't like really made that connection. I was like trying to find other people that were into it. So you were never about mixing. You weren't like, hey, I'm trying to, you know, get gigs at clubs. Mixing was like really important, like because of that experience in Kenya, and I couldn't mix, and I knew that this wasn't the one. Like the week before I went out there, I went to like my older brother's friend who I knew had decks, and I was like, look, man, you've got to show me how to DJ. He's like a house DJ, and he's like, yeah, so you just do this with the faders, and I'm like, okay, and I'm not a house listener really, you know, like this is the same guy who like introduced me to loads of like my early favorites, like early rave stuff, like Sharp and Dance and stuff like that. And were you at the raves too, or no? I was way too young. I was way too young. You're too, okay, yeah, way too young. And I was definitely not cool enough to know anyone that would be going to raves at that time. You know, like, but I knew it was happening. I knew it was going on, but I wasn't connected to it, you know. And so I'd hear like music but I loved that type of music, you know, all the samples and stuff, like, and the sped up breaks, and I could kind of suss that out and hear what was going on, and I really liked it. So anyway, yeah, that same dude that he's probably, this guy Dan was like kind of a guy that it was like my older brother's mate, and like he definitely had a big influence on like what I was hearing as a real young kid, just from secondhand tapes and stuff, you know, that we get off him. And yeah, before I went out to Kenya, I asked him, like, can you show me how to like DJ? And he's like, yeah, probably not in like 5 minutes, but let's give it a go. And I was awful, you know, like he just gave me 2 house records, and I had no idea. I couldn't tell the difference between one and the other, you know, like. And I was just like, am I doing it? And he's just like, nah. So then I get out to Kenya and there's not any decks anyway. So it was just like, well, that was a waste of time. But when I got back, I was like definitely hooked. And I was just like, I really want to know how to do it properly. You know, like I learned a bit about just all of the real horrible worst mistakes that you can make as a beginner, and like now I'm just like, I want to stick with it and I want to learn how to do it properly. And like, so yeah, I had a mate from school who whilst I'd been away, he'd like had a job and collected some money and got himself decks, and his older brother was like really into production and stuff, so like we could kind of explain the equipment to us basically at that age.
And what was your first equipment like? How did you start out? Like when you had your
so
own
then
setup?
like, yeah, like the first, you know, like I done like pause tapes and stuff between all of the different, you know, sound systems around the house and stuff like that. I tried that, and like me and my brother's like really good computers, and we used to like edit that. You know Doom, you know the game Doom.
Oh yeah, Doom, yeah, first person shooter.
Yeah, and we were super into that, and my brother was pretty good with computers, so like we had it like networked up in the house, you know, before the internet and stuff like that. It was like having network games. It was like the future, and you could go into it. You could get an editor for Doom, and you could edit the sound effects. You could edit the pictures for all the different characters and stuff like that, and all the levels. You could redesign the levels. So we were super.
So those were like mods. You guys were like hacking and modding it, or
yeah. The first original Doom. They also released like the modding stuff.
They did. Okay, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was all legit. They were just like, yeah, go nuts with this.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
So we had loads of fun with it, and we'd like sample the movie Aliens and like Terminator and stuff like that, all our favorite films, and like get all the sound effects and get them from tape into this computer in some horrible way. I can't even remember how, but it's really long and complicated. So that was like, you know, before I had any equipment, you know, and I always had like looked in the like magazines at like one day I'm gonna have turntables, and I kind of knew that Technics were the ones that you had to have. Anyone I knew that had decks was probably a drum and bass DJ, and you would just get laughed at if you ever suggested not getting Technics. I imagine, you know, by the time I was getting into it, it was kind of like, don't bother with it. Everyone knew, don't bother with the belt drive shit, just get Technics, you know, spend the money. So I was like, right, I've got to save up, I'm going to get those Technics. So yeah, when I got back to England from that mission to Kenya, like I came and I got a job at a pub and just worked for a few months so I could save up for some decks and start buying records and stuff like that, and just practicing all the time. And in those months saving up was like constantly going around to my mate Eddie's house, and like we were learning together, and like that was it. So you were asking about mixing. He was really into mixing. He had drum and bass and hip hop, and I'd take around some dub and the few like hip hop records that I had. You know, like my whole collection at that point was just like a bag or something. And I'd try and figure out how to mix dub to the hip hop and the drum and bass, but it normally didn't go because it was different speeds, and it doesn't always work, you know. And I try weird things like try and mix them on 45 and stuff and just clash things together, you know. But it was all kind of part of like learning how they worked, I guess. But and then scratching the Jungle Book. You mentioned the Jungle Book, like that was like my first scratch record.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was just.
So you were inspired by Cold Cut when you did that, or you just had that record randomly?
We had the record randomly, but I guess, yeah, I definitely knew that it was like, okay, you sample records. So like I went through all my parents' records and like anything that like it had speech on it. You know, I got that idea. It would, if it's something weird, it will be good. You've got to sample the weird ones, you know. So I've still got stuff that I've nicked off my parents that's like Tibetan bells, like, and random just noises. And I was just like, you know, one day that just 1 second of that record is going to be useful, you know. So like I got loads of random stuff like that. But Jungle Book was one that was just like, yeah, I recognize these samples. I've heard them in things like Cold Cut and other things, you know. I know people sample this, so it's okay, like and I knew that it was kind of like a game to like look for other samples and stuff like that. So
then you got you ended up getting Technics 1200s or 1210s, or
yeah, I got 1210s with it. I saved up and I got some secondhand 1210s from just like I found it on like Gumtree or something, and like got my friends could take me down there and paid cash from some dude.
Remember how much they cost? Because you know how the price is always fluctuating.
It was 300 quid for the two Technics,
Mm.
and some Autophon needles, like not the Concord ones, but like the little ones. What are
All
they?
together, 300 for all of it,
Yeah,
everything.
and a mixer,
Oh,
and it was a
nice.
Gemini Scratch Master mixer,
Uh-huh.
right? And it was just like screwed. Like the faders were like just, and
Hmm.
it's supposed to have these transform switches, but they'd all snapped off. So all you could use, there was one line switch on this side, on
Hmm.
with left hand on record. So that's why I ended up scratching that way around, because when I figured out that like transforming was a thing, it was like,
Uh-huh.
okay, but I can only do it on that side because of the way the mixer
Hmm.
was. So it was just like,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's why
that
it's
kind of
like
had
a
an influence
mixer.
on how I ended up scratching that way. Because before then, I was like, didn't really think about it. I just did it both sides. And then when I
Mm.
got my own stuff, I was like, I can kind of only do it on this side.
Mm.
I remember watching Babu on uh, what's that thing called? Keep in Time.
Mm.
You know the documentary.
Vaguely, vaguely. I probably saw some bits of it, but yeah,
You've
vaguely
you've
remember.
definitely seen it. It's like it's Shadow and Babu and Cut Chemist, I think,
Mm.
and they're like sessioning with like the drummers of some of the most famous breaks from like Ultimate Breaks and Beats. So they've got like the original guy that's played that break. He's on the drums there on the recordings,
Mm.
and like they kind of freestyle with each other, and like it's like a super awesome little video. And I was super tuned into what Shadow was doing at that time. Like I was like prime target for like introducing and stuff. Like we were
Mm-hmm.
totally
That's
vibing up with that. Um, and
yeah, because I
again,
was.
it was all about the really dope quality samples, but also his skills were just on point. His cuts were just
Exactly.
like, oh, you just like you want to do them all.
Exactly. And then
So
the way he blended it into the music.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, they blended it into music exactly, and that's the thing. I hadn't really arrived at the battling side of scratching at that
Mm.
point. I kind of knew it existed, but I wasn't really paying attention to it.
Mm.
But yeah, so the sort of musical stuff like that, I was really tuned into. Um, and yeah, so albums like that were definitely a mind blower. And I
Yeah.
was really looking for stuff like that, anything that combined like lots of samples, dope beats, and if I had scratching
Mhm.
in it as well, perfect. That was definitely my favorite type of music.
Yeah, Babu was one of the first times like I like when I would watch DMC battles in the 90s, like I saw people doing a little bit of scratch drumming and stuff, but I think Babu was the first time I just saw somebody drum scratch and I was like, wow, he just has a kick and a snare and he's making a
Yeah,
whole beat from that. I was like, whoa. I was totally like blown away by it. I was just like rewinding, like what?
yeah,
What?
yeah, yeah. I think that's probably like was like Mixmaster Mike for me when I saw that. It was like, okay, he's actually making the whole, not just the beat, because those other sounds are all on the same record. And like I knew enough about how the grooves were working that it was like, okay, so they're all like just sounds really close to each other, and he's somehow like, it was still mind blowing. But yeah, Babu though was the first guy I saw, yeah, doing those really focusing on the beat juggles.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of got it when I saw that Keep in Time video.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, all right, I sort of see what he's doing there. I couldn't do it obviously, but I sort of kind of got grasped it. And that was the night that I was like, stayed up all night. I need to know how to do that. So it was like the only record I had that had um, any doubles was like, I think I had the album of NWA, Straight Outta
Uh-huh.
Compton, and it had the bonus beats at the end of one of them.
Uh-huh.
And between the two records, you had the break at least for a couple
Mm-hmm.
of loops. So I was like, okay, didn't even know about stickering them up, didn't know anything, like, and it was just like learning what beat juggling was and how to keep the loop going.
Mm-hmm.
Was no way near like all of the stuff that Babs was doing, but like was aspiring to it definitely.
And you mentioned pause tapes. So what kind of music was on these pause tapes and stuff? So this is before you
Yeah,
were.
that was when I was like a real teenager, like sort of 12 to 14 years old, and
What
like
was on
yeah,
those
kind of.
tapes? Like, what kind of?
Well, because I knew about putting music onto tape to get it onto the computer, I guess, was probably why I knew about it. And then, and I knew about like dubbing stuff and making tapes was part of like everyday life, making tapes for each other and stuff like that. Make a tape for the car or whatever. You're going on a long drive. But anyway,
But I mean, like the type of music. Like, was it?
but then yeah, then I got into
Wave,
actually
pop,
like this when I got into like actual individual samples, and I realized that you could pause it, cue
mm,
up another sound, unpause it, you know, and get them all chopped together. I used to just do stupid things like, yeah, again with like the, you know, the Beastie Boys thing, knowing that they said, "Oh my God, that's some funky shit," and that was in that Prodigy song. And so I'd be like, right, play the Prodigy bit up until he says, "Oh my God, that's some funky shit," and then pause it, bring in the fucking Beastie Boys and drop that. And it's like, oh, look, I've stitched together the sample, you know, like I thought it was really clever, you know, and like, but it was like other stuff like that, like just linking stuff together through their sounds. You know, I'd heard people like the Lessons and like Cut Chemist and people and Shadow and people doing that. It's like splicing stuff together manually. You know, and I just, that's always been what fascinated me about it, is like,
and I'm curious, I'm curious
it with their skills, you know.
I'm curious too, culturally, you know, because like in America, in the States, things were always divided to where it's like, okay, there's a hip hop community, and then, you know, there's different types of hip hop within the hip hop community, and over here was like the way that we perceived it, we would always, it'd be like, oh, electronica culture, rave culture. And it was always, you know, it was a smaller, you know, like micro culture within the context of the U.S., you know. And then from where you're coming from is, you know, I know it's totally different. So like those things kind of, they overlapped a little bit, like in the Junglist kind of community, the hip hop and the electronica, rave kind of electronic music kind of stuff overlapped a little bit, but there was really not a lot of overlap. It was only the jungle people that were like, you know, they had the hip hop remixes and stuff like that, you know. So what was
I think it's kind of like,
because it seems like out there everything was just totally all together, where it's like, oh, dub, jungle, hip hop, breaks, you know.
there's definitely like all of this different, those different scenes had like cores that that seemed like, you know, just as dedicated and you know, not isolated, but you know, unique as all of the different scenes in the States, for example. But they didn't have the same scale, you know. Like you always in the 90s, it was like, you know, as a kid in the 90s, it was like looking at America was like 10 years in the future at least, you know.
Okay.
From a UK perspective, it was like if your mate had been to America and came back with some like clothes or some toy or something, it was from the future. Like it was, you know, you definitely weren't going to have that for at least a year or two. And like they'd been to America and like got it in real life, you know. It's like they plucked it out of the movies as far as we were concerned, you know what I mean? Like I think I kind of had that attitude towards a lot of the scenes of, you know, seeing like the hip hop scene is like just this unreal thing over in America that I could never touch. And then in the UK, it was kind of like there was like a version of it. And then I realized that wasn't exactly true. You know, it was like they were kind of both as they were both growing together and really intertwined, you know. But I guess it's just the way it's presented as well, a little bit, you know. It's sort of the way that things get fed to you as in mainstream, you know, sort of pop culture and stuff. It kind of, part of that is selling the story of something, isn't it? And so sometimes you can get carried up, you can get distorted view of like what's actually going on with like a scene like hip hop. The version that was like marketed is very different to the version that was like actually going on most of the time. And it took me a while to sort of understand the difference, I guess, or to begin to understand the difference anyway.
That's really interesting, because for me it was kind of the opposite, because I was always into hip hop, and then by the late 90s, like maybe by like 98, like when I went to college and I started finding out about all the UK music, I got out of hip hop, because I was, you know, I was into Nas and, you know, 96, but then by the time like The Firm came out and all that stuff, I was like, yeah, I'm not feeling this. I started, you know, just getting into IDM and all the Aphex stuff and all the Warp stuff and all the, you know, Ninja Tune stuff. And I started kind of tuning out of hip hop. I started kind of just being like, oh, you know, I started really getting into just like beats that weren't repeating. I just kind of got tired of repetitive beats and just loops that weren't, you know, loops that were just repeating over and over. So I started getting into all the, you know, Boards of Canada and all the Decker and stuff, you know, all the groups that were doing stuff that wasn't repeating, and, you know, just the Warp catalog.
Had a bit more emotion in it, kind of thing.
Exactly. So then from our perspective in the US, we were looking at the UK like, whoa, they're in the future, like they're making all these beats, and we're over here just doing the same kind of hip hop same loops and same kind of
Yeah.
stuff. I looked at it as like, wow, they're in the future. I was looking at the UK as the future.
I kind of felt like that with drum and bass. I guess that
Mm.
was the interesting thing for me, is that there was like hip hop
Mm-hmm.
was like this futuristic, well, not necessarily, it was futuristic. Yeah, it was futuristic to me.
Mm-hmm.
Even the old stuff was futuristic to me, if you get
Uh-huh.
what I mean. Like the 80s still sounds futuristic to me.
Yeah,
Like,
it is.
um, and like the vision of what they thought the future was like is cool in my head, you know. Like I'm just like, yeah, like robots and metal everywhere, and everything. It's like anime or something. Um, but like, uh, the thing with the drum and bass is that it was, and especially seeing as like in Bristol, it was such a strong scene, and there were so many
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, big names coming from Bristol. It was such a big thing here. Um, and you kind of knew that those names were known around the world, and it was like this kind of connection going both ways. It wasn't just, it's just all coming from like New York and LA or something.
Mm-hmm.
No, that there's like this feedback loop going, and there's like local people making stuff that's just as well received and stuff like that. And you know, that followed me, you know, that kind of feedback is so important. Is like years later, like hearing D Styles put in like Portishead on his mixes, or
Mm-hmm.
like or put in like hearing him play Joker tracks, you know, and stuff like that. You're just like, man, he's like tuned into stuff I consider local, and like that's wicked. That it's like it changes your perception of stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's, yeah, that's I enjoy that kind of like discovering little like lines of connections like that as well between all the different scenes and stuff like that.
And you mentioned
Like
Portishead.
Dub's another one like that, and like
Mhm.
collecting funk records and stuff like that, finding out where they've all been sampled and like what are the links to different studios
Mhm.
might be and stuff like that. And like, yeah, same with Dub like that, and reggae, like there's loads of that, like who pressed it. Now that I'm more into like record production and stuff, I pay much more attention to that kind of nerdy stuff as well, like who actually cut this record, who made it, where was it made, what was going on at the time. It's kind
Mhm.
of, it all seems a lot more relevant to me now.
Totally, totally. And you mentioned Portishead too. Like, what when you were hearing those tracks back in the day, were you into the scratches, or were you looking at it as, you know?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely hearing the scratches,
Mhm.
uh the beats and bass, just
Mhm.
like, and it was just so awesomely made, like it's so punchy, and like it just sounded amazing. And it had this kind of dark sort of, there was more to it than stuff that
Mhm.
was just like mechanically made for to be a club banger, you know. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, there's sometimes that is perfect in what you want, but then if there's something that works really well on a system, and as well as it does like in your headphones, or like
Mhm.
when you're chilling, I'm kind of like, that's the real best stuff, you know. And and with scratching, you know, like I think that's an important thing that people should bear in mind, is like how to keep it how to keep it interesting, and keep it
Mhm.
emotive, and stuff like that, because it's such a technical thing.
Mhm.
um it's quite easy to go down the technical route and just get obsessed with just the technical side of it.
Totally.
And there's so much to it. But then, you know, you don't just want to lose, you don't just want it to be pure mechanics. You know, kind of loses something then as well, you know. um so yeah, I like, so the bands like Portishead, you know, they definitely had that extra layer of like,
Mhm.
they're really doing something here. Or like Massive Attack, you know, like you could see they were so well known here, and you look into them, and they've got their chops from, you know, the years of sampling breaks, break
Mhm.
dancing, graffiti, the lot, you know. They've been there and done it the whole way, and they've then taken it up a notch and done something with it, you know, that's ended up on movie soundtracks and stuff like that. And you're just like, okay, like that's next level stuff, you know.
And so tell me about like I'm just curious, like high school in the UK, because when I was in high school, my friend showed me this, this jungle tape. This was like, this was like maybe I graduated 97, maybe maybe like 90, maybe I was a freshman in high school, 94, 93 or something. And my friend showed me this jungle tape, and I was just like, whoa, I had never heard beats sped up like that. And I couldn't understand. I was like, whoa, this sounds crazy. And but nobody else at the school, because it was such a small thing in the U.S. it was such a niche kind of underground thing. I'm just wondering what it was like culturally, like being in high school in the UK, and like, you know, it's just like, hey, people are listening to jungle and rave and hip hop and stuff like that. Like it's all kind of together.
It was definitely all kind of together for me, because it was kind of like you'd hear samples in it, you know, like that's kind of a lot of the time what tied it together. You know, you hear like a Method Man sample, and everyone knew who Wu-Tang was, you know, so it'd be like, oh right, yeah, I know that, and like
Okay.
you hear it, it might be slightly slower, and then but it's going double time over the beat, or the beat's going double time over it, or whatever, and you'd sort of, it helped you kind of understand music as well, you know, and hearing things like that. Knowing that they've slowed it down or whatever. And yeah, and then it was definitely, drum and bass was kind of everywhere. Hip hop was kind of everywhere. Different people would listen to different things though, because I remember like I'd be listening to, I was quite particular about the sort of hip hop I was into. And at the time, you know, from when I was about like 12 to sort of 15, I didn't really know what I was looking for, who the artists were and stuff like that. I kind of knew the sound, knew it by sound. So I'd sort of try and, oh, I like that one, and look into that artist or whatever, and sort of gradually piece it together. But as it was getting, by then it was getting really sort of popular, and like there was mainstream hip hop really starting to come through, sort of mid-90s. And it started to get a bit harder to pull apart what was the kind of manufactured stuff and what was the thing. You know, kids would come in to school with like, oh, this is the new cool thing. And I'd be kind of like, but I'm not that into, like DMX. I remember being like this huge thing, DMX, and I was just like not into it.
Yeah,
like, and everyone's there like getting super into DMX. I'm just like, but it's just like, there's just nothing there that like links to me in any way. You know, like I'm never gonna be some like badass dude on a motorbike being super macho all the time. I was just like, it's like nothing to do with me, you know. Like so like I never got it, and I was just sort of like, how is it that someone like is like that, is so, and he gets all the big music videos and stuff, but I'm here with like, I was really into you know, like, yeah, I loved Wu-Tang. I really loved A Tribe Called Quest, Beastie Boys, stuff that you know, it was something about the funk samples and the breaks and stuff like that. That was the real thing I was listening to. And then when if I really liked that and I started paying attention to the lyrics, and the lyrics were really good as well, and actually saying something, then I was going to stick with that group. If it was just like a bunch of like real 90s sounds and some guy just emceeing about just having loads of money and being awesome, I was a bit less into it, you know. It just didn't have anything there for me that I was going to be like wanting to cop it. And that was the other thing as well. By the time I started buying records, it was really like I couldn't afford records, you know. So it's like the ones I was going to buy, it was like I've really got to get value for money. And I was kind of stupid. I'd kind of buy albums rather than 12-inch singles. Like now I'm regretting it. I'm like, oh man, I should have copped all those singles, you know. But the albums are great, you know. I love collecting albums, and it kind of gave me an idea of like albums were normally presented a bit better as well, you know, like they'd have the nicer artwork, and like, and I was really paying attention to that stuff as well, like the graphics.
And you were doing graffiti in high school?
Yeah, I mean, I was never like much of a writer going out and being an actual proper graffiti artist. But I was really into the lettering and stuff like that, and I just sort of like try and copy it, and stenciling as well was a massive thing.
Like black books and stuff?
Sorry?
Black books, like were you more just into the books?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess there was a couple of us at school that used to do that sort of stuff, like have black books and kind of try and pretend to be like we're a badass underground thing, but like I don't, you know, we probably went and put up a few pieces around town, you know, like we weren't really there. But I had a mate, Walt, who was like super into it, and he like grew up, I think, in Hong Kong, and he came back and lived in Bristol again when he was like, I don't know, we must have been about 13. And him and his brother were just the coolest motherfuckers. You know, I knew like they knew all of these hip hop heads. You know, I was just like, oh, I really like this sort of style of hip hop and stuff, and they're just like, oh, you mean Souls of Mischief, you mean this, you mean that, and I'm just like, oh, these are the guys I need to know, you know, like they know all of the stuff. And they had like cool basketball gear from America and stuff, you know, like shit that I could never dream of having. And but yeah, they knew their stuff and put me onto a lot of like filled in a lot of gaps for me of like who was doing what and how it all worked, I guess. And yeah, Walt was really into the graffiti, and he was linked up with a lot of the sort of proper heads in Bristol, like guys like Paris and Eco. I remember like with two of the sort of big names around at the time, and they were doing amazing stuff. And he'd take me to see like all the halls of fame, and like he knew all the spots, you know. So he'd take me to actually see it, and then we'd go back to his and like learn letters and stuff like that. And he had all that. He had, you know, he was the first person that had like proper collections of like all the pens and the actual stuff, you know. Like it wasn't just like some spray paint. It was like Molotov spray paint and stuff like that. That was like real deal. So like, yeah, and he put me onto loads of stuff like that. And at that point, I was still definitely more into graffiti than I was the musical side of things, but I was definitely paying attention to the music. And again, they were all like in my head, they're all just one thing, you know. Like graffiti to me is like breakdancing on paper or on the wall, you know. And
the culture.
The movements, you know, I kind of imagine the guys almost doing breakdancing to get the piece up, you know, because you have to do it fast, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting because by the late '90s, early 2000s, from our perspective in the States, I feel like Europe, even all the way until now, Europe has embraced, you know, hip hop more than us. You know, like I mean, because obviously, you know, the pop industrial complex hip hop is constantly getting bigger and bigger. But as far as like, you know, just the underground and graffiti and breakdancing and the culture internationally, I've always noticed that, like, you know, like by that point when I was in the late '90s when I was in high school, I remember going on when the internet first came out. Like I remember going online and looking for graffiti stuff and finding Dame and just all these European legends.
Dame, yeah.
Because, you know, and being like, whoa, this is amazing, because in America things were already kind of not dying out, but just very, you know, super underground, you know. And I felt, and it's also like I feel like maybe in Europe the governments were more open to like, hey, yeah, that's the alley over there, you guys can hit that up. Where in America it's like, oh, we're going to put you in jail for 50 years, you know. And
yeah, so, I don't know, man. It's sort of like, it's a difficult one because it's sort of like in the States you've got like the States, and it's kind of one country, but then it's also kind of lots of different states, you know, and like each one of those is the size of a country in Europe. But I think there's probably more difference between one country and the next in Europe than there is in like
it's
one
very
state
uniform
to the next. Even though they do have their differences, I'm sure, like in America, like I'm sure Texas is nothing like New York. Like I've been to both of them and very different places. But there is probably more similarities than say Germany and Spain, you know, like there's like quite a lot of differences there. And so I guess it's kind of almost more varied, but I kind of had that impression when I was a kid that it was like a secondary thing in Europe, and we were chasing America. And it took me a while to realize that I think really what had happened is the same early seeds that had been sown in the 70s and in America had worked their way over to Europe, and it just took a bit longer, but they were sort of developing at the same rate. And so that, you know, you can, in every country you can always trace back, you know, if you get to meet breakers, or you get to meet graphers, or you get to meet MCs or DJs, like there's always the guy who knew the guy who knew the guy who's like way back to the 70s, you know. Like even when we went out to me and Jimmy went out to Russia to visit the NMCP guys, and like they were really opening our eyes to a lot of the heads there that had been like Apache rock, you know, rock dancing. But since like the early days, and like they were going to New York to go and like trade moves with like the early guys, you know, and it's like they were like bikers. It was like biker gang history for them. But yeah, and so that kind of jogged my brain a bit over the years of just being like, okay, so we haven't all just been playing catch up in the way that I always thought it was. It's just that the scenes were a lot smaller and condensed, and they gradually got to the.
I think this is what I'm trying to get at. I think that I feel like Europe kind of embraces the arts more than in the US, like as far as like percentage of government funding towards, you know, the arts, to where like
Okay, right, yeah.
the museum opening and it's like, oh look, we got a DJ playing at the museum opening, because it's like in the US maybe they just started having DJs at museums like in the past 8 years or 10 years, you know, but not in the 90s, not in the late 90s, not in the, you know, like in the US the only money that's given towards the arts are like, you know, a violinist or, you know, some like within the classical sphere, we put the money into the arts and that, but anything outside of classical music, they're not funding stuff. So I remember going, when I first started going to Europe and being like, wow, look, there's DJs everywhere and they're playing, and they're, you know, DJs at the museum, DJs here, DJs here. And there's all these festivals, and the government, you know, will subsidize, you know, things like that. Cause here it's only like the colleges that the government will subsidize, where it's like a college could be like, oh yeah, we got KRS-One and we're going to give him $50,000, even though only, you know, 100 people come to the show. But since it's the university, the student council was like, hey, we're going to give KRS-One 50,000 or whatever, you know, but, you know, yeah, I, you know, like I've noticed that in Europe, there's a lot more government subsidies to where, you know, the government's helping, you know, promoters or things like that, where in the US, it's just all capitalist, where it's like, you know, it's every promoter for themselves and there's no government assistance.
It kind of feels like it's headed more that way, especially in England. But if with the government funding thing, I know it's out there. I know people do it. I'd probably say that I see most of that. The most visible stuff that I would see in the UK is probably still like the classical stuff, a bit like what you're saying. It does always sort of feel a bit like whenever I go somewhere else, like to another country, it's like, oh yeah, like they've got all this stuff. Why don't we have that? But it's often because well, I think it might just be it's different, you know, and you're kind of like noticing it way more. But but then in the UK, like I know people do get funding like that. I just I've never seen it.
Yeah, right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like I've tried it a little bit. I've tried to sort of get somewhere with those you know, trying to get grants and stuff like that, but it's a pretty far-fetched ambition, I think, for anyone. Most of the things that I would know about that are sort of more to do like hip-hop things are normally very kind of community things that people have started kind of on their own and gradually maybe got to the point of someone giving them a local grant or something like that they could do like a breakdancing course for kids or something like that, you know.
Or even just the festivals. I mean, like, you know how just all the you know, because in New York there might be some, you know, some festivals, you know, have the West Indian Day Parade, but that's it. Outside of the West Indian Day Parade, there's you never see, you know, a lot of festivals with DJs out in the streets outside of just random small block parties. It's not like, oh look, this Cardiff Festival, or just all these big, you know, because the UK has so many big raves and festivals, and, you know, like from our perspective, it's like, whoa, we want to be over there. Like I was like, hey, I'm gigs in the UK.
It definitely seems like there's like, because I know a lot of people that would be like, oh, I'm going to like Croatia for this festival, or I'm going to this other one in Germany or whatever.
Exactly. Europe has
I don't know, because I can't really compare it to, I've never been to something like that really in the States, you know.
It's exactly, that's what I'm saying, there's not.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's stuff that we see going on there, but they definitely look a lot more commercial, like South by Southwest. And like,
it's like Coachella, and, you know, there used to be Blues back in the day, and, you know, Lollapalooza. It's just like, if it's not super, because the thing about what I noticed with the difference between the US and Europe is that either in the US, either you're in stadiums or you're in a small bar. Where in Europe, there's a whole strata. If you're a musician, you can be there's a middle class of musicians. Where in the US, there's no middle class. It's like either you're on the top or you're totally underground. Where in Europe, you can be underground, you can be a little bit up, you can be all the way up to the highest point. There's, you know, there's a whole, you know, upper lower class, upper middle class, upper middle class. It's not just like a big giant gap, you know, because in the US it's just like, no, you know, it's like if you're not with you know, there's nothing going on unless you're either with these big giant corporations or if you're just throwing these small parties.
I mean, it kind of feels a lot like what, especially in England, that they are moving towards that kind of a model. It feels like, you know, and I think with all of what's been going on this year, combined with where we were at before all of this pandemic started screwing with everyone.
Oh, yeah, right.
Um,
Now everybody's a bedroom DJ, right?
yeah,
That's what's so funny because the turntablers, we've been doing this for so long, and now everybody's like, "Hey, look, I got my look, I'm in my room."
Yeah, man, it's funny. Yeah, like because I hang around with lots of guys on the tiny chat thing. Like we're there like most nights, so we're just like, pandemic, like what's changed? Like this is just normal. Like, yeah, we're pretty much there already. But I mean, like with the way that like events and everything were going, you know, people are kind of worried. There's a big the events industry has taken a huge blow in the UK. I'm sure it has in America as well. But you know, like the knock-on effect was immediate and brutal for anyone working in anything to do with stage. You know, it was just like many layers of industry were just like wiped out overnight. And then coming back is, you know, they're going to be one of the last things to come back. So what's going to happen in the interim, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of worrying. And before that even happened, it was all getting a little bit corporate anyway, you know? It was very hard to get that sort of funding if you were going to do a really decent event before it got co-opted by being had to be marketable and do a certain turnover. You know, like a perfect example is that we used to have the Bristol Ashton Court Festival every year. And it was never like ridiculously huge, but you know, you had like a bunch of stages, everyone just walked up, it was just free. And saw some local acts, a couple of big headline acts maybe, and like everyone was happy. Face painting, stuff for the kids, you know, bouncy castles and stuff. And then they tried to make it bigger and introduce a budget, and then they started charging, and then the next year it was a bit more, and the next year it was a bit more. And then they started saying, well, this isn't worth it because, you know, all of the damage of people walking up through and ruining the grass and everything, and all these things, it suddenly became an accounting exercise rather than the overarching thing of putting on a festival, you know. And of course all of those things are going to happen, you know. So yeah, as soon as they put a price tag on it, it became unprofitable. You know, obviously it's unprofitable. It's a party. You're like giving it. So that is an interesting one for me because it's sort of, as that went down over the course of about 5 or 10 years, you know, other things started getting a lot harder to do. The nightlife industry in Bristol is sort of very much feeling under attack because a lot of the venues that have been around for ages are now sort of at risk from development. You know, there might be a block of flats going up next door and you can't have noise there anymore. You know, all of this stupid stuff. You're just like, but it's that place has been there for 25 years. If you're moving in, like, you know, there's a club. Like, why are you selling space above a club? That seems a stupid idea, you know. So yeah, like that all combined, and then all of this stuff, you know, it is quite worrying about what will happen. But I actually, at the same time, I think that, you know, musicians and the types of community that evolve anyway to make music scenes and these things happen, you know, they're normally pretty countercultural anyway, and they do it anyway, you know, like turntablism. You know, the guys would just grab into their uncle and their dad's turntables and you plug them into your brother's amp and you make a party happen because you can't do it anywhere else, you know. And I can hopefully I can imagine like that mentality persevering and getting people through somehow until we can do like bigger things again, you know. I know everyone is just like super keen to do it, you know. Anyone that like runs a sound system in Bristol is just like, as soon as we can get out, we will. At the same time, you just got to be like, but do you want to put people at risk, you know? Until you know that you're not doing that, you can't be the dick move and go, we're having a big party, because ultimately you're going to look like an asshole for potentially like spreading virus around with people, you know. So it's a real tricky one. And like, I just really hope that people's like mentality, that's one of the main things with musical scenes that keeps me interested in them is people that are going to be like, just do it themselves, and it doesn't matter if it's not marketable, really. It's sort of like, you want to do it anyway, and like making something marketable is kind of the exact opposite of what's going to keep it interesting, you know. Like,
exactly.
So
commercial art versus fine art, exactly.
yeah,
And so yeah, let's talk about the DIY stuff, because I feel like turntablists in general, the whole movement. I feel like this almost seems like an extinction level event kind of thing, where it's like, okay, all these the whole DJ industry, it's like a COVID came, it's like a giant meteor. And just like with the dinosaurs, it's like, oh, the turntablists is like, we're like these little things that are able to, we can survive. It's not even a big deal to us that
yeah, man.
all these clubs are closing, and because it's like people weren't scratching in all these big venues anyway. Generally, I'm just saying. And so it's like we're able to survive. How do you feel that? Because I noticed that also that turntablists, we tend to be into a lot more different types of music, whereas like somebody's like, oh, I'm only into trance, I'm in industrial this, or I'm into these type of breaks, or like different DJs in general. But as far as the turntablists, we like scratching over all types of stuff, or mixing or cutting up all types of stuff. So no matter what times keep changing, it's like we're always able to bring in new things. um uh what are your views on like kind of like the future of turntablism? We're just jumping forward a little bit, with like all the modding stuff and the portablism, and because it seems like it almost is kind of similar to skateboarding, where people are gonna put their own trucks and wheels and piece things together. It seems kind of similar. What are your feelings on like kind of like the future of?
Yeah, the skateboarding analogy is definitely one that I relate to, and from the start, like me and Darcy and Adam, when he was involved, we always talked about like cut and paste and the label
Mm-hmm.
with a kind of skate brand like ideology almost, like
Mm-hmm.
like we were kind of looking at those and how they worked, and when they didn't work,
Mm.
because skating has the same thing, where there's like a core thing that isn't particularly it's not exactly rocket science what you're trying to do, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just like your raw human skill that makes it what
Mm-hmm.
it is, and some of the brands recognize that and some of them don't, and try and make it seem like it's their product that's making you the most amazing skater in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. So like and DJing definitely has that going on in the equipment manufacturing thing, like making equipment desirable and making it so that it's like, this is going to make you the better DJ. And I just think that is just a complete like cul-de-sac really for most people, because it's gonna mean that you're probably going to end up diminishing your creativity, if you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
if your main thing is to like, how do you do it all automatically? I don't want to learn, like um I guess for me, even before there was like DVS and everything, it was always like the sort of the art of DJing and the
Mm-hmm.
skill. Like almost going back to your first question, even was saying like, was I into like mixing and stuff? Like absolutely. Like I needed to, for me, I needed to know that the mixing was on point,
Mm-hmm.
and that the knowledge was on point, understanding the gear, understanding the history, because you're also when you're if you're trying to get good at DJing, there's also like this whole history of people that you've learned from, like, and people that have reached all these amazing milestones on their own, like Cool Herc gradually, piece together, okay, like you could just get two of them and like have it going forever, and like gradually putting these bits together, and someone else comes along, he's like, yeah, you can make it more efficient this way, and all just that is a slow process that's happened. And then you can learn it, which is awesome. We can teach each other, and like, I'm totally a child of that generation that had it pretty much on tap. By the time I was really getting into scratching, I had the internet. Early
Mm-hmm.
2000s, it was I could start looking at YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the movie Scratch came out. I was definitely like prime target audience for that. And seeing stuff on there, and like, yeah, seeing like the scratch notation. I'm sure that's the first time I saw scratch
Mm-hmm.
notation.
Yeah. What about
um
modulations? Did you ever see modulations?
the documentary,
Yeah, I'm just curious if you ever
I
saw
don't
that.
think I've seen that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely check it out. It's on YouTube now. It's for free on YouTube.
Yeah, sick.
It's called Modulations, and they featured scratching it. They had Qbert in it and stuff. but it was
Huh.
just about DJ culture in general. It was a documentary, so you know they just everywhere from just every kind of genre and stuff, and they had a turntablist section. But yes, definitely check that out. It was because it's mostly, you know, they got Prodigy in it. They, you know, a lot of all the UK legends and stuff.
Yeah, I mean that side of it's always been kind of really important to me because it's sort of like there's definitely like this kind of knowledge that people, you know, that the guys that I really look up to, they all
Mm,
sort of have done the homework basically,
mm,
and they understand mixing, they understand digging, they understand samples, and they understand you know, they've gone into the music where those samples are coming from. You know, like it's not just someone just browsing and grabbing whatever because it sounds cool. It's like I really, you know, you can tell when someone's really done the extra work and they understand that it means something to them. You know, when they've sampled this particular thing. Um,
mm.
yeah, that's definitely a sound that I look out for.
And you mentioned cut and paste. So tell me about your relationship with the label and all of that and how that came about.
So that kind of, so yeah, uh, I moved. I studied in Leeds. I did. I went to art college, but all of my mates were at music college. I had like a main partner in crime, DJ M. Shout outs to DJ M. Me and him used to like we were both really into, you know, we knew about like Qbert and Mixmaster Mike and that, and we were like, we want to do that. We knew that we knew about Shadow and Cut Chemist, Brain Freeze.
Mm-hmm.
We were like, oh my god, two guys, four turntables, we've got to do that. And so like I used to like 2 or 3 times a week, like go over there on foot, like across town with my mixer in my rucksack.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we'd go and practice these like insanely elaborate like half an hour sets where like everything was happening all the time and like
What mixer was that?
I had I splashed out and got myself a secondhand Technics SH 1200. So like I was like, no more of this fucking around with this stupid Gemini mixer. I need one that has the cut in. That was it. I think it was the movie Scratch that I realized that you could do the crab thing, and I was like, okay, it's the faders do something. They don't just have these long faders. They can
Mm-hmm.
do it like that. Okay, I kind of got that, and then I started seeing like the Vestax mixers and stuff. But I got the Technics one.
Mm-hmm.
I think I just saw it, and it was kind of like, yeah, you know, maybe one day I'll try and enter DMC. So I should get the mixer in case I ever go down that route, which I kind of never really did. But I was really happy to have that mixer though. It was a proper Scratch mixer. DJM had recently before that he got one of the Stanton ones.
Mm.
I can't remember the exact model, but it was kind of like the blue and silver one. And like I just remember we were just like the faders just felt like compared to what we had, it was just like a completely different thing. And we were just like, this is how they're doing it, you know? Like you got all these switches and like really quick cut-offs and stuff. That Stanton, like typical cheap Stanton mixer, it didn't really last that long. It started sort of the bit started sort of falling apart a little bit, and we managed to keep it going a little bit. The Technics, similar kind of thing. It lasted a bit. That I had to change the fader out once or twice, but I got pretty good mileage out of it. And we used to just sit there. Yeah, we had like a ramshackle thing. Like I had my original set of Technics. We got broken into, and I got all my shit robbed. So I ended up with I had one more Technics eventually, and then we had like just the most ramshackle thing. I think it was the Technics and then a Newmark, like, but not a very good one. And then something else. And yeah, that was it. It was 3 decks of one of those Vestax, the D3s, like the sort of wooden ones. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of horrible, but it did 10% pitch, which was a big deal to us. And yeah, so like we had this weird ramshackle thing. And we used to practice these really elaborate 3 deck sets, and we were trying to be like Brain Freeze or whatever.
Oh man.
And then towards the end of my time there, like I was like really getting into, we were trying to do like a band thing, and like we had this wicked house where like we could make as much noise as we want. So people would just come around, and we'd have like the drums in the kitchen, and then like a whole band just crammed into the living room, and like 3 DJs and MCs, keys, drums, bass, rhythm guitar,
Wow.
electric guitar. It was a really sick thing, and we only did a couple of live jams, and they were great fun, and we were all like really into that idea. But we kind of all it was right as we were all kind of about to go separate ways. So it never really turned into the thing that we all hoped it would. But it was really fun whilst we did it. And that was a real important one because we made this band with DJs. We realized that like by having DJs in the band, you're committed to whatever speed they're doing. Because a band can speed up and stay in key, but if I speed up my sample, it changes the pitch, you know, and like that was just like a real head fuck for us. And figuring that out was a big thing for like understanding a lot about music, I think. And that made me interested in like learning other instruments a bit more as well, you know. Like I've messed around on pianos trying to work out a song one key at a time and stuff like that. But that made me want to like learn drums, for example, and be like, I've got to understand these beats a bit better, so I know what I'm doing. And then that was really when I started really getting into making beats and stuff. Moved to Edinburgh, and I lived there for about 4 years. I worked at like a sound and visual, like a hi-fi shop. I was around music and stuff a lot of the time. I was really studying turntables, understanding how turntables worked and what made them good. And why the Technics was actually really good. Yeah, the reasons, you know, that really made it good, rather than like all of the sort of myths that we all tell ourselves as DJs, you know, like finding out separating some of the fact from fiction a little bit. And then like I ended up getting a cheap set of Vestax at that job, and that changed the game for me as well. Like, you know, getting the ultra pitch thing. I had one ultra pitch record, which was the D Styles Funk Shit Up, Seek and Destroy 6.
Oh wow!
And I think I bought it because it had the electro beats on it, and I never really fucked with the Skipless was so fast. I was like, ah. And then when I had the ultra pitch deck, it was like, aha.
Okay.
And then that led me, you know, I was super into D Stars and Ricky Rucker and Mike Boo and all the guys doing like real musical stuff. Hearing the, you know, like the Nozzle stuff, Jimmy Penguin. And Naive Ted, you know, like hearing that, I was hearing all of that kind of all merged around the same time. Lorne, that took me all to the Digital Vertigo website, and that's when I really started linking with people. Because when I was in Edinburgh, again, you know, I was just my whole like musical life, whatever, teenage life, I'd been like feeling like I was playing catch up, this game of catch up with like, where, you know, trying to find these scenes. You know, I knew jungle and drum and bass was huge in Bristol, but I only knew a few heads. Your graffiti, again, you know, I only knew a few heads, and that when I linked with the guys on DV, it was like, oh, there are still people doing this. You know, it's not just all died and I've missed it. There are people actually still doing it and really into it. And that was just when Lorne was, you know, Lorne had gone from making loopers and stuff on there is when I'd first tuned into him, and then all of a sudden, you know, I'd kind of just seen that, and then he was like making a bit of a name for himself, making computer game soundtracks and stuff like that. And I was just like, wow, there's like, you know, there's this whole, it's like a back channel from the mainstream bullshit that I just loathed, you know. And I was just like, I don't have any time for that. I want to know what people are really doing with music and stuff. And that seemed like a scene that was really doing something. And so I was like, this is really cool. And yeah, people were into the more musical side of things, like Ricky Rucker and stuff like that. And so I was, and I started paying attention to his records as well, like the utility phonograph records. They blew my mind. The idea of really going in on the quality, really going in on like the sources of the sounds and making them deliberately, like just not just chopped and thrown together, but like really paid attention to it. The fact that they were making albums out of it, like the Bastard Language Tour thing, you know, that blew my mind. And it was just like this whole thing that can just exist on its own. I was like really impressed and wanted to do that, you know, and saw that, and then so with the DV guys, they started doing the Scratch Sunday.
Okay.
Super Scratch Sunday.
And what year was this?
Must be like 2008 or 9.
Oh, okay.
And like I in that sort of 10 years between like the 2000s, and I got like really into DJing. My opinion on like music and club music and stuff was just constantly going downhill. I was just sort of feeling that like club music was getting awful. I really wasn't into to what was really getting played. I liked, in Leeds, we'd go to a lot of raves and stuff, and I liked what I'd hear there. But in the main, you know, the stuff that people getting paid to play, I was just like, I don't want to do that. So like, why am I being a DJ towards this thing that I don't really want to do? You know, like it kind of messed with me a bit. And so scratching was something that I was just like, well, I want to do that anyway, and I don't need to do it for a job or anything. It's just like something that I'll just do. And yeah, so then gradually in Edinburgh, it was cool because I gradually found again, you know, some local heads and there was nothing going on in Edinburgh at that time. This is like late to you know, 2008, 9, 10 kind of time. Like there was really nothing hip hop wise going on. Hearing from friends or going back to Bristol, it was sort of felt like, you know, the days had gone of like when there seemed to be loads of really dope hip hop everywhere all the time. It didn't seem as vibrant, and you know, I was kind of feeling like things weren't the same. And then in Edinburgh, like met a few heads that were just like super up for doing some like, you know, underground stuff and do some small pub gigs, and it doesn't matter, you know, it's just doing it for ourselves and for our friends. And so that was a good few years. Linked up with a couple of MCs, Tickle and Texture, who were sort of big names in the Black Lantern crew, seeing as like Scottish and, well, UK wide collective. Great MCs, loads of just links to interesting stuff going on, and like especially in Edinburgh, like it's even more so like what we were talking about with like everything being so huge in America and then seeming like more concentrated in the UK. In Edinburgh, it seemed even more that like any scene was not big enough to sustain itself, so everyone was quite happy to share between all the different scenes. Like you know, you'd happily go to a drum and bass night one night and a heavy metal night the next night because you're all from the same group of friends, because there's literally not enough people to sustain like all those scenes on their own, you know.
That's where the innovation happens, the cross pollination. That's great.
Oh yeah, and so it wasn't even a thing, you know. Like definitely there was. I remember thinking that like this wouldn't be okay in Bristol, you know. Like Bristol would be a bit more like, oh, I'm not. That's a drum and bass night. You don't have heavy metal heads at the drum and bass night. Why would you? It wouldn't be like off limits, but it would just be kind of like not as obvious a connection as it would be in a city like Edinburgh to just be like, yeah, of course we're all going to come to each other's nights. Anyway, so like yeah, linked with those guys, realized that there was this connection to what was actually happening at the time, and hearing about Sketchbook in LA because of like Hudson Mohawk, who was like making amazing beats and had this link to like all these American heads and they were bringing them over, like Flying Lotus and that scene over there, and I could see the connections between that and people like Madlib and other like sampling artists that I really rated. And yeah, to me that was like, okay, like there are people that are still, you know, making really dope beats. Too Tall and Clockwork and Caper put out the Continuum. What's it fucking called? Continuum Beats Continuum or something. Fuck, I really should remember that name because it was like that was a really important mixtape to me because it was all current stuff. They did the past 10 years from 2000 to 2009. They did like a 1 minute mix of like every dope beat from that, all just like manually mixed together, chopped together and scratched together, like B-sides, instrumentals.
Like from what genre? What kind of music? What kind of beats?
They just called it beats, which was kind of a new idea. It's saying I make beats was a new thing at the time, and that was what was getting me back into music in general. You know, that there was like, because like rapping had just like completely died for me at that point. You know, like there weren't any rappers that were really doing it for me. And the instrumentals was what I was looking for, but not hearing much of. And that was my link back to it, was like hearing those really chopped up, manually crunched up beats that people like Hudson Mohawk and Flylo were doing. And then finding out that, you know, like Hudson Mohawk was a scratch DJ before. He was DJ Itchy when he was like 13 and entering DMCs. And I was just like, of course, you know, his beats sound like they've been pushed around on a turntable, you know? So I was like, I'm totally into this. And yeah, got really into those sort of instrumental beats for a long time, and got me into the idea of making beats, actually. Like I got an SP404. I got some software on the laptop. I started making I really wanted to do loop pedal stuff, like watching D-Stars do his loop pedal stuff was just like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. Like one turntable, one mixer,
Mm-hmm.
make songs out of records. Like that's exactly what I want to do. Cut Chemist was doing some really cool stuff with that as well, like loop pedal stuff, like longer loops. He was doing kind of like mixtapes
Mm-hmm.
that were like chunks of songs. So he's kind of like making a Madlib style beat tape, I guess, but he was doing it live, and I was just like, I totally did that. So I tried to make I couldn't really afford any of this gear though. So like I was trying to make a loop pedal, like my first loop pedal. I had the laptop, and I got this like free loop pedal software called Mobius, and it's sort of like an 8-channel looper. And I figured out it was a nightmare to figure it out. Like it's just like really bare bones thing, and like I just had no idea what I was doing. And gradually, it's like for guitarists and stuff. So all of the help forums, like they're not even speaking really the same language as us anyway. So it's just like really confusing. But I gradually got this thing working. My wife's sewing machine had like a little button on it that you could unplug, and it had like a little headphone jack on it.
It was like a
little foot switch.
Trigger.
Yeah, the little trigger, exactly. And I figured out that you could plug it into, I had like a MIDI keyboard, and you could plug it into like the sustain, and then get the software to realize that you'd click the button basically by plugging it in that way. So I had this super long-winded like thing, but the whole idea was just like, you can make tracks, you can make songs out of records. That's what I've always wanted to do, you know? So like, yeah, I just spent those years like getting really into mixing, perfecting mixing, and like learn, you know, really trying to pay attention to like making mixes actually really good, rather than just playing the music I want to play, but also like just making sure that like just practicing getting the like smooth blends and stuff, so I know how it works, even if like I don't necessarily want to be that DJ that does your whole like 6-minute mix. At least if I can do that, then it's like I know what I'm talking about. And really, you know, because scratching is just really fast mixing, essentially, isn't it? You're using the same skill set. It's just you're using it much faster. So I was just like, it makes sense to understand that. So I spent a long time doing that and trying to get gigs at like dubstep nights and places that, you know, where like getting the sound right on a big sound system mattered and stuff like that. And I'd stay away from scratching too much at those gigs, because I didn't want to fuck it up, basically. I didn't want to make it just be that guy that ruined the night by being that DJ guy who's like, hey, I'm here to just show off for 10 minutes in a row and just drive everyone mad scratching too loud. I was well aware that it was like not welcome to do that, and that if you really wanted to do that, you better be damn good, you know. You know, I'd watch someone like Kentaro live.
Oh wow!
And it was like he has earned his way to be able to do that. You know, he he's not just won all the competitions, but he's genuinely got the skills to keep an hour of scratching interesting, you know. And like that was definitely something that I was like, I'm a long way from that. I'm gonna have to like learn that shit, you know. So and I was like, well, I'm gonna have to start entering like battles and things like that. So I started entering sort of like online scratch battles and friendlies on Digital Vertigo. That was a huge help. Like the fact that it was friendly, that there was nothing actually in it. We weren't going to just like live forever in shame if we lost. It was just like 5 friends having a scratch and like giving some feedback. And we did it with beats as well. Like on DV, we'd have a beat battle every month or every couple of months. It was very vague, but it meant that for all of us out there that were like, we're not professional beat makers, but we're trying to learn, or maybe we do know how to make beats, but we're just not like our main thing. It was just an outlet for it, you know? And so we'd do the beat battle, and then we'd have a scratch battle the next month. And like,
who runs Digital Vertical?
At the time, it was run by Steve Sigma.
Okay.
I think he's still running it now. I got banned.
Oh, you did? Oh,
yeah. It's almost a badge of honor, but yeah, I got banned from it. But
well, what happened with that? I mean,
it's a long story. Do I want to go into that? I kind of fell out with Steve. You know, I hold no ill will against him. It was just, we got into an argument about sort of politics or society or whatever, and yeah, I even called it. I was like, oh, I'm gonna get banned, and then like and then I was banned. You know, like, yeah, it was a mess. But you know, at the end of the day, like I had that site was a massive part of what really important for me.
It's a very important site for just turntablism in general, you know, just for the culture.
Yeah. and the guys that I met on there, and the fact, you know, that link with the Scratch Sunday thing, you know, that really started a lot for me. I didn't realize that the first Scratch Sunday I went to, so I was in Edinburgh. We happened to be traveling to London that weekend, which is a bit of a mission. We were visiting some friends, and I was like, oh, it's the same weekend these Scratch guys are doing something. And I was like, all right, I'm going to spend the Sunday with these Scratch nerds, and then we'll meet up and go home on Sunday evening. So I went and did that, and it turned out to be the second ever Scratch Sunday. And for them, they were like, wow, there's guys all the way from Edinburgh coming. And I'm like, you guys link up at all? Like, you know each other from scratching? You know, like, I didn't know anyone. Little did I know, by the way, that I was like living 5 minutes from Richie Rufftine's house, but we didn't know each other. We knew like about each other, but or I knew about him at least. But we didn't know each other at that time. And it's just funny because years later when I went and visited his, I was like, man, this is so funny. I used to live like there.
Crazy.
But yeah, went down to Scratch Sunday. That was wicked. We started going as a crew to the Community Scratch Barbecue, which happened every August. You know, we'd see that happening.
And what was the name of the crew?
Just a Scratch Sunday. Just, you know, because we linked up for Scratch Sundays. We did that for like a year or two. And because we're all talking about, you know, what we're seeing from Community Scratch Games and the barbecue, and we knew, you know, between us, we knew a lot of those guys. You know, like a lot of those guys were mates with like Too Tall. He's not like CSG related, but like other names, other names in the scene. They were doing stuff, you know. So we were kind of seeing this stuff happening, sometimes involved with it. You know, and there were people that were doing stuff like Black Randy. And Jimmy Penguin, you know, they were on the forums and they were really doing stuff, and you're just like, cool, we'll go to their events. CSG in Ireland was a bit more of a commitment because you have to get a plane ticket over there. So barbecue was one, and we would all go to the barbecue as like the Scratch Sunday crew, because we were all like, oh, you're all going to be there, we'll turn up together, and we'll just like, you know, we'll probably have a thing afterwards. It was on a Saturday, so we would do Scratch Sunday on the day afterward, because it was like only a couple of cities across. So anyone that traveled far, you could then just like sleep on someone's couch, go to Scratch Sunday the next day. So it was like this wicked weekend. And then we realized that like Manipulate was saying to us, he was like, we got him to come and do some showcases, and he was saying, you know, you should do the Scratch Sunday like at the barbecue the day after, and we'll just make it a 2-day event. Like, there's no point in you guys like all leaving early on the Saturday and missing the last like hour of the event, which is like normally the best bit, so that you can get back in time to go to something. Like, what's the point? Like, you should all just be in one place. We're such a small scene, you know. So like that was a big thing, linking those two things together.
And how often were the events happening? That was every Sunday?
Yearly. Oh, the Scratch Sunday was pretty much every 2 months.
Okay.
It was pretty regular. And I'm talking about it like it was. I mean, we just haven't done one because of COVID for ages, but you know, it's still going. In fact, we've just organised. We're going to do like an online one for December. I think on the 13th. So like, obviously, you're welcome to drop by to that, and just we're going to do it like this, you know, just like show off some scratches and chat some shit and whatever.
That's dope.
But yeah, so we just all those things kind of like merged together. You know, the DV crew, Scratch Sunday crew, you know, there was battles going on DV, people were making stuff, you know, like that was a link for me. Jimmy Penguin used to enter the battles, I used to enter the battles, we'd talk about them afterwards, and then like, you know, once or twice he'd be like, I remember he just like sent me back my track one time and he'd mastered it. He was like, hey, I like that track, I polished it up for you. I was like, oh, that's super sound, you know, like I've never had a track mastered before. And then we're talking, and eventually, you know, we ended up doing an album together and doing Scratch Laws and everything. But like
yeah, so tell me about the Scratch Lords and how all that came about.
So Scratch Lords has kind of like been around as an idea for years, you know. It's kind of like I think the first time I saw it referenced was like Jim put Community Scratch Lords on the back of one of the every year he did the t-shirts for the it's all connected to the Scratch Games. The Community Scratch Games started in 2006 in Ireland. Jimmy Penguin and Andy Deviant or Naive Ted were like two of the main guys setting it up at that point, along with a few other dudes. But Deviant also moved for a time to Brighton, and him and Manipulate ended up crossing paths. And so Manipulate went to the first games and was just like, this has to happen in the UK. Because it was just the complete opposite of what had just basically died. You know, like the whole reason that the games, one of the biggest factors, I think, was that they didn't have any battles going on in Ireland anymore, because the IDA, I think it was still, maybe it was ITF still, but whatever, the DMC and the IDA weren't happening in Ireland specifically anymore. You know, they were considered not big enough or whatever. And all the guys there were just like, this is stupid, because like there were so many really good heads out there, and a really strong battling scene, you know, like real personal battles. You know, like the guys were like really cleverly working out names for each other to diss each other because they knew each other, you know. So there was so much going on.
And these were just scratch battles, or was there juggling involved?
Like juggling, like at the DMCs and stuff, like all of the local DMCs stuff
so
was
battle.
There was like a real strong scene there, but then they just decided the DMC pulled the plug, you know, and like that was always like a bitter thing, because everyone was like, why? Because it was so strong, it was, you know, it was almost stronger than the UK, you could argue in comparison. Anyway, these guys they're the guys that stood up and went, well, fuck it, we're going to make our own thing. So they did the games, and it wasn't really about the competition. They always had the scratch battle called the Battle Royale, but the prize was just a bag of meat. It was like, it was supposed to be like, it's not serious, that you're not staking your career on this. It is in a pub, you know, you come here to have fun, yeah. Like, it's not to sit there just being like, analyze the scratch and what did he do, you know, like it was about fun. And so yeah, Jim loved it, and he started at the barbecue like the year after. So like I think 2007, and then I think I started going, I don't know, 2009? No, 2010 it would have been, because the 2009 video, I remember watching the Community Scratch Tour video, and I think that's when they did it. It went all around the country, all around Europe, and I missed it because I couldn't be in Bristol. I think they went to Bristol and I couldn't be there for that, and then I couldn't be in Brighton, and I was just like gutted that I missed this awesome tour that I knew was happening. Watched the videos, and it was like, I'm never missing that again, you know. And so the next year was when I started going to the barbecue with the Scratch Sunday boys. And we also, so you were asking about cut and paste. We'd started going to all these events, and Darcy had moved from Canada to the UK for like a few years, whilst I think his partner was doing a course or something like that. He was in the UK for a limited amount of time. And I remember when he first popped up on DV, and he was like, hey guys, I'm coming from Canada. I could really do with like borrowing a turntable for like a few months whilst I'm like getting set up. And I was one of the guys that had like responded to him saying, you could borrow one of my Vestax or something, you know, if you're in a pinch. And I think he ended up getting a deck off of someone else. But me and him, you know, stayed in communication. And there was also Scratchworks at the time. There's Forum Scratchworks, and I was also on there a lot. And Leighton Harris turned up with his Skipless record, The Man of War, and I, like, independently, me and Darcy were both looking at that thing and being like, I know, you know, I don't know what I know now about record production, but at the time I knew enough to be like, what he's doing with it, like it had etchings on it and a really nice cover, and like I think he did like splatter vinyl, and he had your name etched into it. And I was just like, man, how is he doing this? He's selling it for £10, which was cheap, you know. And I was just like, man, how? And I messaged him. I was just like, dude, like, how are you doing that so cheap? Like, that's crazy, you know. Like, surely that's like a £20 record. He's like, and he sort of explained, because he like works at the factory.
Oh wow!
And I was like, no way. And so like, Darcy basically had that same conversation with him, and then between the three of us, we ended up, I think, you know, at some point at a Scratch Sunday or something where we were all there, kind of talking about the actual practicalities of making a record, and Leighton really filling us in on how it's, you know, some of the real pitfalls and things like that I just would never have thought of, you know. And so, and at the same time, I'd been messing around a lot with, I'd finally joined the 21st Century and got Serato. And I was making my own scratch sentences on Serato, because I got into making, like on DV and stuff, like I've been talking about, like I made my own dub plate. And I was sort of saying to people, you know, why don't you get a dub plate made? They cost $40.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if you think about it, like how many scratch records have you bought for like 15, $20?
Exactly.
And you only use one sound, you know, or,
Exactly.
you know, so like if you actually customize it and you use every sound, then it's kind of makes more sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of dipping my toe in the water with like getting dub plates made. You know, it wasn't exactly common knowledge how to do it or who to go to at the time. And
You
yeah,
went to
so
his
I got
factory, to Lighton's factory, or?
no. This I got this just I got a plastic cut by a guy Dub Studio who now Henry at Dub Studio. It's now called Higher Level Mastering. It's a Bristol-based dub plate studio, and he cuts into plastic discs. The old terminology of dub plate is like, if you want to get nerdy about it, is like a true dub plate is an acetate 12-inch acetate disc, and they wear out really quickly, basically. And they're very expensive, and that's sort of less common now, because in the past sort of 10-20 years people have made the cutting equipment, they've adapted it a little bit, and you can cut onto sort of plastic discs from certain types of plastic and cut records that way. It's a lot cheaper. It doesn't sound quite as nice, but in terms of like the practicalities of like making one-off cuts and selling them, if you're like a small,
Like
you just want to do a small run thing,
like
you know, you can get them
devices?
sounding.
Like
Sorry?
like those home devices, like the Best Tax one.
It's a little bit like that. So those were famously like a little bit shoddy. Like you could get nice sound out of them, but they were like all a little bit hit or miss. By the sounds of it. I've never actually played with one, so I can't say 100%. But that's definitely the impression I get, is that like they don't always deliver. But they were a great idea. But they were very specific. You had to get specific blanks, and you had to buy the stylus, the cutting stylus from Vestax. You know, it was like a really difficult thing to have. There was a German guy, who came up with a way of like, because the Technics motor is really solid, steady motor. And so there's a guy in Germany figured out that using a Technics 1210, you could actually build a mechanism above it and modify it a little bit to make it into a dub plate cutter. And so he'd sell that as a kit. Kid Koala's actually got one.
Oh, wow.
Lots of people have them and sell them, and they sell their services cutting dub plates. You go, as part of buying the device, you pay for a week's training in Germany. You have to go to learn from the guy, and he
How much does that
build
cost?
the machine. Oh, it's like a few £1,000s. I think you know, if you were going to buy it and get like, you know, your amplifying equipment and all the other gubbins, you're probably in for about £7,000 to £10,000. You know, it's not a small amount of money. But this is the thing that you're likely to be building a business out of. It's not like something that you're just going to do because you feel like it, you know. And Henry was one of the early adopters of this thing. It's called a T560. And so he was knocking out dub plates for like, you know, he's very well known in Bristol for like all of the guys that are like dubstep and reggae and dub heads, getting their dub plates cut and doing one-offs and versions and stuff. He's busy all the time already. I heard about him when I was still in Edinburgh, actually through my wife. She heard about him through this like article all about, he did this one-off, like she's really into jewelry, and he did this ring that had like an etching in the ring, and you play it back like an Edison cylinder.
Wow.
Totally crazy. And he got a lot of fame off of that, but he was always like, I'm never doing that again. Just to be clear, that's not a product. I'm never selling that again. Like, super hard. But he makes really good cuts, really good dub plate cuts. And so, yeah, my wife actually got me. Sorry?
His name is, you said?
This guy that in Bristol that does it is called Henry from Higher Level Mastering.
Okay.
And he cut my first dub plate, and it was I worked out the skipless thing. All I had was that 1.8 seconds was the loop. I didn't really think about it in like the geometry kind of thing yet, and so I stuck a bunch of loops on there, and I loved all the sounds, but they were kind of all at different BPMs.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Kind of random, and like that was my first big lesson, was realizing that dropping the needle across, even though they all started at the same point, they weren't all mixed to the same record, to the beat I was playing. You know, I'd have to still change the pitch, and I was like, oh right, okay, that's why they do it this way. And like, I kind of missed the scratch science records. I never really got any of the scratch. I knew they were there, but I never got them, so I didn't see the pattern until I did get one of those, and I had the that Funk Shit Up one, and a couple of others that like started to get my head around that kind of the shape that you could make, and it was like, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. And it kind of goes back to that whole idea of like the idea of stems. You know, we were talking about how Tractor have the stems on almost like it's on the vinyl, and I always wanted that, but in like an analog way. You know, I love the idea of just dropping the needle onto the sound that you want, and being able to visually mix it and stuff like that. All of these ideas were like, this is all possible with these ultra pitch turntables and lock groove or skip proof sounds. And so yeah, I was starting to make my own sounds basically and put them onto dub plates. I kind of knew in my head, I was like, making records is something that I've missed. The industry's probably not going to survive much longer. I could kind of see the realities of how expensive it was going to be.
Making records, like making vinyl, or just making?
I mean, actually pressing, commercial pressing. Like, yeah, I was kind of seeing that as an impossibility at the time. And Darcy was the one that was like, he hit me up, and he knew that I'd made these dub plates, and he knew that me and Leighton had, you know, me and him and Leighton had all sort of nerded out about it. And he was just like, you know, like, you can do the sounds. I'll put in the effort on hustling this thing. I reckon if we just put together a Kickstarter, we raise the money for the pressing, and we just do it, man. I mean, like, it's too good an idea not to. And I was just like, look, man, like, every single person I know that's like a label owner of like a drum and bass label or a hip hop label, like, they've got 500 under the bed. Like, it's standard. Like, you press it, and then it's like, you know, I got it out to a few famous DJs or something, but like, I didn't really sell it. I realized how hard it was, you know, and he was just like, look, we should try it, you know, it's blatantly something you've always wanted to do. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, let's do it. And so we put up the Kickstarter, and to my amazement, you know, in the 10 days or whatever it was that we had, enough people had pledged, you know, like, I think we asked for 10 or 12 quid or something. Enough people had pledged the money that it was like, it's basically paid for, you know. And like, I think we put in a couple of hundred quid each as well, just so that it wasn't entirely Kickstarter funded. And when we had to do something, Kickstarter you weren't really allowed to do that on Kickstarter at the time. We had to like word it in a funny way or something to get through there. You weren't allowed to like do pre-orders or something like that, but we somehow got around it and did it, and it was all good. And yeah, and I was amazed, like, enough people ordered it. We're like, damn, we're going to really do it. So we like put in the order. Leighton helped us with like, make sure that you asked them to do this and whatever. And it was like super budget, you know, like the first Cadence with rhythm and flow pressing didn't come with like a proper cover, just a white cover. We couldn't afford it, you know, like, it was just like bare bones. And we even went to the factory ourselves to pick it up, because we couldn't afford the postage back to our house. So we're like, we went in, like, I got on like Megabus, like a real cheap bus service here, and we put them in suitcases and dragged 250 records each back to our houses, somehow not warping any of them either. And yeah, that was a real buzz, man. And watching them and selling, I think we only had to sell like 100 or 150 to like kind of cover the costs. And then we still had like, and then we must have given away loads, you know, probably like, I don't know, 50, I don't know, like at least that, like loads. And then we sold the rest, and you know, we made enough back to just do a whole nother pressing. And it was just like, damn, like, we actually sold them all, you know, like, I can't believe it. And that's where we realized, you know, the scene was just so hungry, like, everyone was so keen to get their hand, like, Scratch Science had stopped doing their thing. Vect had recently like made a big deal out of like finding some Scratch Science stock, and everyone was fiending for it and being like, Vect, give me that Scratch Science. And he sold out of it really quickly. And so, you know, we knew that people were keen for it, and we were like, well, if we can do a record that's kind of like as useful as one of those, with that nice sort of layout, but like with some sounds that are a bit more like, you know, what we want to say, not just about being the dopest DJ, but like, you know, with a bit of other attitude, you know, like saying there's something a bit more. That was the kind of vibe we were going for. Because people like, you know, watching people like Jim manipulate, just he's great at cutting up, finding those lyrics that kind of like they work well as a cut, but then they also kind of like mean another thing as well a lot of the time, or like, you know, he twists another word into meaning something to do with cutting, and often has like another message, you know. So that's kind of what we were looking for, is like how do we make records that like have that level to them. And then, yeah, watching the guys that had been like Ninja Tune, that had made such useful records, and really thought about it from a DJ's perspective. That's what we were kind of thinking about. It's like and Ricky Rucker as well, you know, who's making utility records, you know, specifically for you to get busy with. The Groove of Satire as well. Those guys were doing some really interesting records that were like all focused around high quality samples laid out in a way that a turntablist could use. So yeah, I was just like really keen on that stuff, man. And that's was the main thing for our label, was like, how do we make the label like really useful to people and make records that people are gonna, you know, we wanted it to be so that you could like reach for one record, or like if you're doing a DJing set, you don't have to take loads and loads of scratch records. You can just take one or two, and you're set for like a whole host of different scenarios. You know what I mean? Like if you're in a drum and bass night, you've got some samples that would work in a drum and bass night, but equally, like if you suddenly wanted if someone was like, hey, I'm really digging the scratching, can you do a all turntablist set? Cool, well, I know where the skip-proof drums are, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like making it that.
It's also a lot like you guys are basically, because with that industry, it's almost like making synthesizers or making samplers. You know, it's making patches. You know, it's almost like, you know, the samples.
Sure, yeah.
Like,
but yeah, it's like the building blocks.
Here's another synthesizer. Here's another synthesizer. Here's another sampler.
Yeah, that's totally it. And like by the time that we started looking at doing instrument sounds, sorry man, my cat's scratching at my door.
Oh yeah. Scratch too.
Come on then, drama queen, let's go. No, he doesn't want to come in because
he just wants to scratch. Likes the noise. Scratch.
It's like that, is it? I'm just gonna leave the door half open for him anyway. So what was I talking about? Damn.
Oh, I was talking about the it being similar to patches, like the sample.
Oh yeah, I totally linked to that. I totally related to that, man. I'm kind of, when we started doing the first sort of records with musical samples on, I mean, it was always on the cards. We always wanted to do that, but it was like, we can't just come straight out the gate doing exactly what we want to do. You've kind of got to go a little bit with the flow. You got to, you know, so we had to kind of put our finger on the pulse of what people mostly wanted, and definitely those sort of dope vocal hooks was definitely something that people were going to go for. I was really into the idea of not putting R and fresh on the first record, because it was like, come on.
It's been done so many times, right?
enough people I asked when I said, you know, would it be such a crime to not have it? And they were just like, come on, you've got to put it on there. So I put it at the end to kind of be a little bit like, you know, at least listen to the other samples, and I'll put it there anyway. But that's a funny one, you know, like selling this record and like seeing it pop up at people's scratch meets and stuff, and then just seeing someone go, yeah, where's the R and fresh? And you're just like, man, we spent ages on that. Like, you know, like, oh, look at the other sounds. Then when we linked up with the first couple of records, like when the second one that we did with Adam with Cut Class, you know, that came around really quickly, because me and him went to the DMCs together. I stayed at his. It was quite regular. He'd often put me up if I was coming through London. We'd have a cut and go and do something. So yeah, I stayed at his. We went to DMC's, and then we went back, and that was it. We just put out Cadence, and he was like super helpful with like just being really forward with people and saying, "Si's made the scratch record. Check it out. He's got it in his bag. Buy some," you know. And like, so he's there like helping me shop them all at the event. And when we got back, we were just talking about the you know, how it all worked and stuff, and like, you know, he knew enough about it to sort of understand the skip proof idea and stuff. You know, he does a lot of his own production and stuff like that, and he got it. So we were just talking about it. well, you know, you've got all these dope acapellas, like we could sample them right now and start doing it. And like we just literally stayed up all night and like made another record pretty much that night. You know, like a lot more work went into like refining it and like arranging everything, but in terms of like getting the source material, it came together very, very quickly and naturally that night basically. And so we were just like, well, we've got to do this. And so the idea, rather than like starting up a new label, we decided to just sort of like incorporate all of our skills between Darcy and me and just sort of team up basically. So yeah, that worked really well for a few years, and we put out a bunch of releases. Really helped. So you know, and a bunch of lucky stuff happened at the right time as well, because like I went away to Texas, like to go and visit some friends, and then I ended up linking up with like Dopez and Christian Dominguez and Freddie Swiftstyle and all the scratch Texas Scratch League guys. And that was just when we released it, and on like Instagram and Facebook, which I never used to, you know, I was like still really new to all of that, but it kind of looked bigger than it was, because, you know, like I was going there, and then like a couple of months later Adam went out to Chicago and LA, and then like a few months after that I went out
to me in New York. He visited.
Yeah, of course he did. Yeah, exactly. And then yeah, because he it was like right after there was like a big crash, a stock market crash in like 2008. And I think it was as a knock-on effect of that, like he got like made redundant. So he like had he had like the best part of a year to kind of with a decent amount of money whilst he was waiting for it to start a new job, you know. So he did some traveling. I can't remember if that was the exact how that went down, but he had some time off work basically that he was able to like do some really cool stuff with, and so that's what he did. He went to America, just happened to coincide with all these releases, so it kind of like looked like we were like this label jetting around the world, like doing more stuff than we actually were, you know, like. And you know, and then Darcy had moved back to Canada, so I think at one point we had like one head in Canada, one head in Chicago, and one in Belarus all at the same time, and it was all like going online and looking like we were sort of really busy, you know.
National,
and so yeah, it's just like we were busy. We were doing like lots of new stuff and like coming up with new ideas, and just like, yeah, we could, you know, getting really good feedback from the records and making sure that we were making them useful, putting drums on them, putting lock tones on them. It was just like, make sure that is a key thing, so that if it is your only record in your stack, that when you need it, it's like, okay, I do have some drums, I do have a tone, I'm a scratcher, I can make a sound out of anything, right?
Exactly.
You know, rather than be like that guy that's like, I haven't got the right record, or I haven't got, you know, it needs to be like this. You know, so that's kind of what we were trying to do. And then yeah, people were just wanting to put records out with us, and so like we, at the same time, like my interest in sort of dub plates and vinyl cutting and everything had linked up, and a lot of this stuff had sort of emerged online behind the scenes as well, with like Tiny Chat. Now before that there was Pal Scratch, and a few heads were kind of scratching together and talking through Pal Scratch, but it was kind of a lot more chaotic than the Tiny Chat crew that emerged. Tiny Chat, it kind of, a digital Vertigo Tiny Chat started, and then it kind of just moved over to another channel for whatever reason. But it's pretty much always the same crew of people. So like, you know, Vect used to be on there a lot. Richie was on there a lot. So in fact, when Richie and Vect were like very much battling each other in IDA and stuff, you know, they were rehearsing that, not rehearsing it together, but they were, you know, they knew what each other was doing to a certain extent. You know, like we were critiquing each other's routines and offering ideas and samples and all of this, you know. So it was like much more friendly than I think some people might think. They might think that they actually hate each other or whatever. And like, you know, me and Rich get the same thing. Like some people think me and Rich like don't like each other or something, or that we're in competition. And it's like, no, like we link up like every day pretty much, and like talk about this stuff, you know. We nerd out about it and really help each other develop our ideas, you know.
And tell me about the tours in like South America and all that stuff. I saw y'all had a big tour in South America, like
so
turntablism, you know,
gradually
popping up all over the world.
Yeah, gradually, like, you know, more and more events became like a regular part of our calendar. You know, Darcy was kind of like, it doesn't matter where on the planet I am, I'm always going to come back to Ireland every year for the games, and I'm always going to come back to Brighton every year for the barbecue. Like those are just like my Christmas and Easter, you know. And you know, I'm the same. It's just, it's a bit easier for me. And then we, you know, things like the Sample Music Festival, where I met you. That was another one where it was kind of like it just all tied together. For me, that was actually the beginning of like linking up with the Scratch Lords thing. So like you'd asked about Scratch Lords, like the Scratch Lords idea had started with Jim just kind of putting Scratch Lords, the community Scratch Lords was like on the back of one of the t-shirts for the barbecue, which he did a fat t-shirt every year for the barbecue, and you'd like buy it to support, because it's a free event, you know, so like that was like pretty much the only thing you could buy to support it, you know. And so yeah, the t-shirt was like a must-have, and one year it had like community Scratch Lords written on it, and like no one even like asked who are the Scratch Lords. It was just like, it was kind of just obvious. It was like just an idea. It was just like, I guess we all are. I guess those guys, whoever's playing, I guess, but someone here, these guys, someone here is the Scratch Lords probably. It was just kind of an idea, you know. And then Lone Wolf kind of started using it with his Bloody Blade idea, and like he started doing these photos because he's like really into like graphics and visuals and stuff. He's like an amazing artist, and he started doing these photos of like, yeah, wearing this like silver face mask and like holding a samurai sword and wearing this Scratch Lords hoodie. And then he sold the Scratch Lords hoodie, and everyone was just like, I've just got to have that thing. I don't, you know, I don't care. It's got swords and Scratch Lords written on it, and whatever that is cool. And so like a bunch of people were just like buying that. So it was kind of like an idea before it was even a thing. And then like with that image, like Jimmy and Jack were kind of starting to do a lot of stuff together in Ireland, like do gigs together and turntablism as a focus. And those guys have always been like really pushing it in terms of using DVS in really creative ways, and like, but keeping it really hands-on. You know, those guys were kind of ahead of the game in a lot of ways. And this, anyway, they started doing their shows and using Scratch Lords as the sort of poster. They did like a Facebook thing with like Scratch Lords. And Jimmy was just like adding every date that they got as a gig. He just like add it, and it was like an endless tour poster. It's like, what a wicked idea. It's sort of like this like constant thing. And that kind of was going to accumulate in the Sample Music Festival in Berlin, the first one. And I wasn't even planning on going to that, but Jimmy was booked to go to it, and he was like, I'm booked to play on it. Like, why don't we just do it as Scratch Lords? Because we were all in Brighton together, and I think Eric Kubik had come that year, and me and Eric had a connection because we both knew Christian, and it was kind of like, oh, cool. And he was like, yeah, I know all the guys in Berlin. You've got to come next week to like, it was like 2 weeks time or something. You've got to come to Berlin. And I was like, I wouldn't normally make such a kind of like last minute mission, but I was just like, damn, no, it's going to be awesome. Like, let's do it. Go and support Jimmy for his gig. These cool guys. Eric's clearly a nice dude. So we went and did it, and I'm so glad we did, because it was just such a great thing that Alex was doing. And I knew who Alex was through all of his like tutorials. You know, I was just amazed by how far he was taking it with the musical notation and everything. I don't even really understand it, but I was just sort of like, this guy has really looked at it in a deep way, you know. Like,
he dropped a lot of tutorials then.
Yeah, and they're amazing. Like, you know, the complexity of what he was doing with the syncing the video and stuff, so that you could see the playhead moving with his scratching and stuff, was like a really clever idea. I think most of them were in German though, so I was kind of like, I'm never gonna get it. But they were. I was really amazed by what he was doing. And then yeah, so we went to the Sample Music Festival, and we ended up just doing a Scratch Lords gig. Jimmy was just like, you come and scratch with me and Jack, and we'll just scratch for a bit. And we ended up playing for like 3 hours of just completely random beats thrown at us by Jimmy. I've never scratched with Jack or Jimmy, you know, we'd never done it before, and it was just like so much fun, and it just worked. And we were like, this is the thing, you know, we've got to keep doing this. And obviously Jim Manipulate has to be involved, seeing as he's like the overlord. So like, that's when it really started becoming a thing. And the other thing that led to it was that before that had been What Tyler's Sound Card, which was Jimmy Penguin, Jim Manipulate, and DJ Chili and they had worked together they'd done 2 or 3 gigs together as What Tyler's sound card, and it was supposed to be like, well, it was like really fast, aggressive, weird beats, and insane scratching, and like they were just like, we're gonna just fucking do raw, a million miles an hour death scratches, and like it was wicked. It was like the perfect ending to something like the Scratch Barbecue, you know, like just drunken mayhem. And after a few of those gigs, Jim asked me to join them for a gig at the barbecue. I was just like, yeah, like got to scratch with these guys, and like really, really great experience. And for whatever reason, that we only did that one gig as all 4 of us, and we didn't do any more What Tyler's sound card after that. But the idea was kind of that's kind of what became the Scratch Lords. It was just like, but you could, you know, we kind of proved to ourselves that you could do an hour's scratching and keep it interesting, and it's not just about like just raw technique and just dazzling everyone. It's about like just this like raw energy and like getting people to dance and stuff, you know, like that was the real thing, is like building up a vibe and not scratching all the time, you know, like and really you know, that was the key thing for us, was just like, let's not make it all about like just self-referencing endless, aren't we cool because we're scratch DJs and I'm the best, I've got the most skills. It's kind of like, yeah, no, everyone in this room watching is amazing, we all know that. What do we enjoy about it, you know? And so like that's kind of what we're trying to pull out of it. And that's the vibe that we were kind of that we chase in the gigs. And it's all about just being improvised, because we can't rehearse it, you know, like we all live in different cities in different countries, so it's like this, the whole point of it is that it's as raw as it can be, because like we're hearing it for the first time. Like we might plan together, we might plan a set of beats that we want to play over, or we'll just leave it to Jimmy to throw whatever he's got in his laptop at us, and it's that's what it's about, is like trusting each other and listening to each other and trusting the crowd and reacting to the crowd. And it's kind of like you get out of it so much as well, because it's like you're not just throwing your whole life at this 6 minutes of like intensity and just worrying about fucking it up the whole time, you know. Like I think we've all kind of been there to one extent or another. And the sort of freedom of like the freestyle vibe is definitely part of it.
And how was that tour? How was the South American tour? Because it seems like you talked about planting seeds before. It feels like y'all are doing a lot of amazing work, and that y'all are actually planting the seeds around the world and actually, you know, facilitating the growth of the culture in places where, you know, because you know, for me, like I had heard like, oh yeah, you know, Eric J and, you know, people in Brazil, you know, there's people winning DMCs and stuff like that. But then when I heard about, you know, Argentina and Chile and, you know, and all the different types of places where like other things are going on, I'm like, wow, that's crazy. I had no idea that people are, you know.
So the touring thing is like, we always wanted to do that, especially after the Community Scratch tour that happened in 2009. Like, you know, I'd watch those videos, Darcy's watched those videos, and we were just like, that is just so awesome. These guys just did it themselves. They just jumped in a van and drove themselves to all these different countries, and the whole scene was just a lot better for it. You know, it doesn't even, it almost doesn't matter what they did, even though all of the, when you find the videos of those individual performances and they pop up, you're just like, this is all just awesome stuff. Why didn't I know about this? But then also, it's like, it's just the fact that they actually just went and did it, rather than sitting online complaining about it not happening. They were actually the guys going and doing it, you know. So it was like, that's what it's about. And so yeah, a lot of these tours that we've done, like the cut and paste stuff, had been like slow ideas that have happened over time. So like I remember, sitting down with Jimmy, we came up with a 12-inch cardboard plan one day. We literally just drew on a piece of cardboard we had lying right here. And just drew out like a bunch of stuff we wanted to do. We were like, okay, so right now it's like November at the time, and we like planned out like a year's worth of stuff. What have we got to do this year? We've got to do Community Scratch games. We've got to do Community Scratch barbecue. We're going to do sample music festivals. So those are 3 things. What else do we want to do? And like, tried to work out how it could actually happen and how long it would take to, like, you know, plan it out and get the money or whatever it was that needed to be done. And we ended up checking off pretty much everything on that list, including making the Scratch Lords record. And from that, you know, a bunch of other stuff happened, you know, like with the Scratch Lords record became, we were like, well, let's do a tour about it, and let's make something out of it, you know. So we were like, well, we want to get to Russia. You know, we've always wanted to go out to Russia. I'd been to Belarus and met with the NMCP guys who'd come from Russia to Belarus, and then we'd all met at Electrofood's house. We did that back in 2015, and that was like the early seeds of the ZA record idea. You know, those guys were already cutting basically ZA record on their own dub plates. Like they've got their own dub plating machine that they built themselves from scratch. Like that's a whole another story, those guys. But so yeah, they were making their own scratch records, and they were like, we want to press them, you know, because making them one by one is like expensive and not quality or whatever. And I was like, yeah, you know, I want to put this record out for you guys. So that's where like the first ZA record came from. And like they already had like the Zalupas were out. And the artwork for it was just its own things, weird, like portrait of Putin made out of money, and like that artwork was amazing. It's by this guy.
It stands out of my head. Like, you know, I'm very visual and I have a very good visual memory. I'm not great at remembering a lot of other things, but visual memory I'm very good at. And you know, I can, you know, right when you said it, is our record. You know, I could picture the Putin thing in my mind.
Yeah, it's such a good image, isn't it? And yeah, the guy that made that 8D, he passed away recently. He was an absolute legend. Really forward-thinking ideas with his art, and it's really prolific as well. Like if you ever found what he was doing, like I think he had like an Instagram account and stuff, and like I was blown away by like how much stuff he was putting out. And he was just so quiet about it. You know, it was really hard to get in touch with him or anything. You know, like I remember we tried to pay him for that artwork, and it was just like, did he ever get the money? I don't know. Like he's like super vague dude. I'm really glad I got to speak with him a few months ago, actually, you know, before he passed away, because I really looked up to him, you know, from an artistic perspective. He was just doing so much. And yeah, so that the artwork was a big part of that release. Sorry?
COVID or anything, or?
I don't think so, no. I think he had something else. But yeah, so yeah, that whole project, the ZA record thing, I mean, the sounds those guys, the beats on that record, you know, the sounds those guys were making were just like totally their own. And I was just like, this is just so, it needs to be, the beats need to be on wax. That's the main thing for me, was like, we've got to get those beats on wax. And some Electrofood as well, you know, I needed an Electrofood beat on wax. It just has to happen. And then the other side was just all going to be the skip proofs that they already had, you know, like we just rearranged them a little bit to make them a little bit more like straight up kind of thing, how I would have put them. But I didn't want to like mess with it too much, because to spoil the vibe kind of thing. It was kind of like just tweaking it a little bit, I guess. And yeah, that came out super nice. That was the first time that we did like a section of instruments. And like, you know, dedicated that thing, so that, because the idea with that was like all those heads out there that might have loop pedals or samplers or whatever, it's just like you just got it right there, and you can visually see, you know, using this kind of grid that the skip proof records offer, kind of see where the beats are going to be, and you can literally like put the needle on the sound, and like that was kind of the idea, of like just being able to do that really easily. But we didn't want to take up too much of the record with music sounds, because we knew that like the vocals were still like mostly what people wanted.
Right. Exactly. And let's talk more about that too, the intricacies of the technology, because you know, you guys are pushing the boundaries, you know, like, you know, as far as the US, I feel like, you know, after the Swamp and the Pickles dirt style and all that stuff, people kind of you know, I mean, there's obviously, you know, the early 2000s stuff and D Styles dropping battle records and stuff, but like it feels like now you guys are like the new, you know, center hub of the innovation that's really happening, because you guys kind of reminds me like I don't know if you remember Turntable Lab.
Yeah.
But I actually went to school with him. I was at NYU with him, and Jasper. I was at school with him, and he dropped out. they dropped out, and they went into they had this little small, I remember like in Chinatown, or no, it wasn't Chinatown, it was like by the Holland Tunnel, they had like a small office, literally like the size of a, like literally, just super, super small, just one little room. And at that point, that was the only place where you could, online, where you could, get dirt style records. Oh, you could get some rectangle records. You could, because before it was all scattered. It was like you're at record stores and
Okay. When was this?
Oh, this was 98, 90,
Okay.
90, 98, 99, late 90s.
To me, that's like a peak era, when stuff really seemed like it was really buzzing.
Yeah, because before that, everything was all scattered. It was like, hey, you go to the record store, but then it was like, oh, now there's the internet. And it was like, wow, they had everything in one place. So it was like, oh, people could, they had everybody's, or not everybody's records, but they just had a lot of battle records all in one place. And that's what actually started their whole company, was because they were the only place that had all the a lot of the battle records in one place.
Yeah.
And then,
I bet like the fact that a lot of scratchers are so nerdy and like probably a bit more clued up with things like the internet. It kind of feels like a lot of scratchers are like at least a couple of years ahead of other people.
Exactly.
In general,
I mean, we're pushing the industry, the technology, all the Serato and all the Rangers and all this stuff, all this crazy. Because it's like, I feel like all the techno DJs, they would have been fine with just having slow faders and knobs. They didn't care, they didn't care about all that stuff.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I find it interesting when the technologies do cross over, how people's perceptions of like what makes a turntable good or not, and people get very people are often looking for like the definitive answer of what is the best turntable. I want to know what the official internet certified best thing is, and it's just like it's not. It's never as simple as that. It's like what works for you, But like there are definitely some positives and negatives. But
a lot of people. How do you feel about portables? Because I was just talking with Disc, and I was telling him, like, for me, I like scratching on portables, but it kind of feels like the difference between playing with the basketball and then playing a regular basketball, and then like a girls' ball that's smaller and lighter. And then if you play with the girls' ball for an hour, and then you switch back to the bigger basketball, if it throws off my shot, where it's like, oh, I just missed.
Yeah. But then, like probably with like basketball players, one of the real super mega heads would pick up any ball and do some really dope shit with it. That's kind of always my mentality, is like, at the end of the day, if you're going to go around bragging about being the dopest DJ, you better be able to do it on a fucking Fisher-Price turntable as well as you can do it on Technics. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, of course, the nice kit is going to help you. But at the end of the day, like this whole art form came from just the absolute rawness of like not even having nice faders or anything, like even why people flare scratch, it's because they had switches and up faders. They didn't have crabbable clicks like we have now. It's like, it's a completely different thing. And like, I think there's definitely like you've got to remember that. And I find it really helps with my like learning scratching, is like deliberately kind of limiting things and trying to work out what guys would have had to do all the way back in the 80s and stuff to be like, or even the 70s, like how did you make something sound funky with such limited tools, like, your needles were going to skip, you weren't on Technics most of the time, and you definitely didn't have a nice fader. So like, yeah, I find it's important to recognize those limits and be able to work with them. And the portable thing, I ultimately I love it, because I had one of those. I've still got it. My Newmark PTO one. I had the original grey one, and I had it for digging. Pretty much for one spot in Edinburgh. There was this particular shop that I got that record player for, because the guy was really awkward. It was like this cave. Like you go in and it was just like all this vinyl about to collapse on you, run by this guy who was just like clearly didn't really want to actually sell any of it, and was just sort of like, don't touch that, and like, don't go there. And really, it was an awkward experience shopping at this place, but he had really, really amazing crates, So I would go in there. It was called Backbeat Records, I think, in Edinburgh. And I bought the PTO one for that, and also because I used to go to the car boot sale, like the well, I don't know what you call that in the States, you know, just like selling, just in a car park or whatever, just people selling their junk. I would go there and take the portable deck because it was like 20. I got it really cheap, like 20 quid, and I was like, for that, you know, for all these cheap records that you can find, if you're willing to dig for them, that's why I bought it. And anyway, I ended up seeing on YouTube someone had one of the Vestax ones, and they cut this way round, and they were cutting on the Vestax fade, just on the volume fader.
Yeah,
and I was just like, that's so cool. Like you can do it. Like obviously, I'm not getting any ideas about doing like amazing scratches, but I was like, that's dope. You know, like someone's bothered to like show that it's possible. And around that same time, Qbert was doing a 7-inch Skipless dirt style, like Super Seal or something like that, but it was super rare and it had already sold out. But the idea was there, like you could see the idea happening. Like everyone was like, so you could make a 7-inch Skipless record, because obviously it's like going to skip a bit more on these shitty turntables, but it does basically work. You know, it had been proved. There was a video of someone scratching on a portable. It was like, it doesn't just eat your records, it works. And so like pretty soon after that, this is like 2011, and I pulled out my portable and I just sort of like opened it up and looked at how much space there was in there, and I was like, you could just get like you could drill out a slot and you could just get like a little passive fader. I knew what you know, that you could have a passive fader, not as nice as the cuttable ones, but just like you could get these little ones that were just really short. And I was like, well, that's kind of like the Vestax one, you know, it's just like a short throw. You could just about cut on that. So I just bought one. It cost me like 5 quid in components, and I like really badly like wired it together.
You did it. You
just jacked it into like a bit of the audio. You know, I just figured out which one was the audio cable and just like literally just put a fader in the middle of it, and it basically worked. And I think I've even got a video of me like the first time I took it out to the park, and like. And I even proved to my mate Tickle that we had this whole idea in our head. We wanted to do like busking. And I was like, man, I've got this whole idea where I could have my laptop running this loop pedal with the sewing machine pedal, like proper, like all just chucked together. But it could all be battery powered. That was the point. I was like, you know, in theory, we could do like a half-hour, maybe an hour-long gig outside. You know, I think he had like a portable speaker or something. So we were just starting to come up with that idea, and then clearly like the portable thing was starting to kick off online and on DV. Very soon after that, Rastery broke it all down on Digital Vertigo. He was like, here is the all the elements you need to know. You know, I've gone and I've drawn a diagram of like the circuit. So if you know how to do circuit stuff, here are your raw elements. And then I think Wax Inspector, who'd been doing it for years, he was like, oh yeah, I'm way ahead of you guys. He's like showing off his super pimped out PTO1 with like a replaced speaker and an actual fader, and everyone's just like, whoa. And it just blew up super quick. Like over the course of like months to a year, it had gone from like this kind of idea to like to like, okay, you can mod these turntables. It's a thing. People were starting to make things. There was the Japanese Frisk fader. Do you remember that?
Yeah, so I was just about to ask you, like, is this before or after the Frisk fader? Yeah.
That was before, and then I saw the Frisk fader came out, and it was kind of like this mythical thing from Japan that no one was ever going to spend like $30 plus shipping and ordering from Japan. Like it was just like, I'm not doing that. It's blatantly going to be shit. And the picture of it was someone plugging it into an iPhone, and iPhones were brand new then. You didn't have like any DJing software on them, so it was like it was definitely going to be shit. But I bought one anyway just to be like, I want to I want to just know what it does. And I bought one, and it was shit, but it was hilarious and awesome. And it
has like hiss in it or click in it, like. It
had a bit of a click. It was just really lightweight. I immediately like opened it up to see what it was, and it was basically just the exact same thing I had, but with like a slightly nicer feeling fader, but not much nicer. The idea with the Frisk fader, I think really the idea was that their idea was that they make a little portable fader that you can practice clicks on.
Right, yeah.
And if you really want, you can plug it into your phone and like actually cut the sound, but it's not for really using. But anyway, I ordered one. I
Back in
think
the 90s, we used to practice with the old, like the old Vestax fader. Out when you take it out of the thing, people would just
okay.
carry those around and be like, click,
Yeah, it
crap.
doesn't work electronically anymore, but you can still get the mechanism sort of thing. It was that idea, I'm sure, is like what the Frisk Fader was all about. I remember like going onto the website and having to like Google Translate it, like early days of Google Translate, and it was like just not telling me anything useful. Words just, all of the like way that the internet, the way that the page was arranged was just screwed up, and like I just sort of like randomly clicked my way through, and eventually thought maybe I paid some money. And about 6 weeks later, eventually this thing turned up. I just assumed I'd set my money on fire and it wasn't coming, but it eventually turned up. Plugged it into the portable. It was like, oh, this is actually a bit better. But by then, I mean, that's how long it took to get to me, because by then the Raiden fader was already an idea. The guys were online going, we're going to do this thing, and they were doing mock-ups, and it was like, okay. And Rastery was doing his nano board, which was like a mod that you could put into the PTO1 and then hook up your own like Pro X fade or something like that. Okay. And I think it did some other stuff as well, like maybe you could put an input in and have like beats running into it, and it was a really clever idea.
Was this before Innofader came out?
Innofader existed as a company, but they weren't doing portable ones. But it was just a matter of time. Everyone knew that Elliot was watching what we were talking about, and it was just a matter of time for the really good shit to arrive. And so everyone knew that like buying a Raiden fader, it was like $60 or something, but everyone was like, this is going to get me through like the next year until the real shit arrives. And the only thing that was really missing was material. And people were already talking about doing 7-inch scratch records and making them skipless. We were in a bit of a dilemma where we were like, we really wanted to do it, but we didn't really have the money to like definitely do that and the 12-inch that we wanted to do. But again, like Adam was working with us, Cutclass was working with us at that time, and he really saw it as like such just a no-brainer, and convinced us to do it anyway. Because me and Dusty were like, we definitely get it, but it was like we both prefer, like you were saying, we both prefer the 12 inches mostly. And we were like, nah, I mean it's cool and all, but like I'm not desperate to do it. And Adam was like, I just think it's such a good idea. People will really appreciate it, and they really did. Like when we dropped and it was because when we did the cadence, we did cadence on one side and combinations from the masters on the other. So it was almost like you got sort of 2 scratch records in one. But also at the time, it was one of a pretty small pool of skipless 7-inch scratch records. So people definitely appreciated it.
What year was that?
So we did that. Must have been like late 2015, 2016 maybe. So yeah, I'd say 2015 was probably the year that Portablism actually took off, and people were starting to actually make products for it. The couple of years before that, those few years, it sort of existed as an idea, and a few heads were like modding their stuff, and people like Rastery and Wax Inspector had actually figured it out and like gone, this is what you need. And then it just took time for people to actually make the proper bits. And then, of course, Newmark re-released the PTO1. Jesse Dean got involved. And all the other guys started making really dope faders. And MCP started making their unkillable faders. And it became a thing. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole separate thing. And I love it because it's like really raw. It's very accessible, for guys that like want to that are into scratching but don't want to like necessarily commit to an entire DJ lifestyle. That's understandable too, or for like, I was never going to get turntables as like a Christmas gift or something, like it's like way, like you're talking like £1,000 like of stuff. It's not something you can just jump in with. Whereas with a portable turntable, an upgraded stylus and a couple of scratch records, you could probably do that for like 150 quid. That's like a bit more realistic for like someone who, say a parent wanted to buy their kid their first setup, so that, I saw a lot of that potential with it. And just the fact that loads of heads that were like, I haven't got space for turntables anymore or whatever, and it's just like, it just brought this little element of simple fun to it. And it was like, yeah, cool. I'm well into this.
And what about now? How much are you guys still releasing 7 inches? Or is it?
Yeah, totally. We decided then and there, it was just like, you know, it's a whole nother scene in itself, and it's also helping keep the scene in general innovative and alive and accessible. You know, not just price wise, but like, you know, having a portable setup is definitely something that a younger DJ can like realistically get into. For a number of reasons. So like, yeah, there's all of that, and so we were like, yeah, whenever we do a release, we're going to aim to do like a 7-inch version of it. So I've just finished editing the, like, Mr. Brown did Telemetry. We're going to do a follow-up 7-inch, and again, it's another vehicle for us, because for cut and paste, like one of the main ideas is that we wanted to bring out the musical side of scratching and support the music that people make with scratching. Music that people make with scratching in it, even if it's just as a, you know, an additional instrument. It doesn't have to be like all composed on turntable, but like just keeping all of that going, providing that the tools to keep that going. And if portablism is another aspect of that, then like that's great. So like we fully support that, and I try and design the records with the gear in mind, you know, not making them too, like with the first Skipless, we made the grooves way too skinny. People, no one really moaned about it, but it was like one thing that we noticed. It was like, okay, so you know, you don't want to make it too skinny. Like there's a difference to designing a 7-inch to a 12-inch, and like how they react, how easily they skip, how fiddly it is to put the needle on the record.
The tracks were too short, or what do you mean was too skinny?
So like when you cut, like here on this 12-inch,
yeah,
you can see they've got a nice even, and there's like a decent amount of space that you could chuck a needle at to get to each of these sounds.
Yeah.
On the first 7-inch that we did, we just didn't guess it right, and we thought we were going to be putting whole lot more on, and it ended up coming out with like very skinny tracks. And then, like when you drop with the portable, it's like such a fiddly, it's much smaller thing, and you're outside or whatever using it, so it's like you need it to be simpler in a way to get to see where you're putting the needle, and that it almost needs to be a bit more rugged and hard wearing, you know. So we were kind of like, okay, we'll do less of the intricate stuff that we're trying to do with the records and just keep it more about functionality for the 7-inches, but still keep that kind of originality and interesting vibes going. And we often put on the B side is put an extra beat, you know. So for like Alchemy Files that we did with Samaya, when he released a 7-inch version of that, it was like another excuse for us to put out a different one of his beats, because it was like, rather than pick one of the beats that came out on the 12 and then leave someone disappointed or whatever, it's like, well, why don't we just release a new track, and then that's getting more Samaya music out there for the world to hear as well, you know. So that's a big thing for us.
Did you guys end up using a different vinyl factory for 7-inches than your 12-inches, or is it the same?
I think we've had everything made at the vinyl factory in London. Just because we had such a good working relationship with them from the start. They've always done really good quality stuff. We know what we can ask them for. You know, different factories are kind of capable of different things because of the way that the way that the machines actually work, or the way that their particular production line works. So we kind of know what we're working with, and like when you're laying out so much money to get, you know, it costs, you know, a few grand to do a pressing, and so you want to know that it's going to be right. You know, when it goes wrong, it's an expensive mistake. So that's one reason that we stick with them. Never needed to change, basically. I've had the masters cut by various different people. We mostly get them done by the same guy, which is the guy that does them, that the vinyl factory normally recommend. He's called Pete Norman, really talented vinyl engineer, mastering engineer. We've tried a few other guys out. They've done really good jobs, but Pete's really good with the lock grooves in particular. For a project that I'm currently working on, I've gone to a completely different place because we needed something really, really specific, that you needed like a particularly modified lathe to do. And that's been a really interesting learning experience, because, you know, dealing with a different guy, you know, you've got to build up a whole relationship with him of like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm asking them to do kind of weird things, and do they trust me? You know, like, do they just think I'm some like crazy guy that's asking them to basically like do all of the things, the wrong things in their, from their like in their audio engineering mentality? It's like loads of stuff I'm asking them to do is just like, you never do that, that's a stupid idea. So there's also that, you know, like Pete Norman is, I ask him, can I do this, this and this, and he'll just say yes or no. These other guys, they've been great, really communicative, but it's like, it's a lot of effort to make sure that you're both speaking the same language, you know, because it's so technical, and you might have a slightly different idea about what one particular terminology might even mean, you know, like it's really tricky. So yeah, but it's always a learning experience.
When you guys are doing lock grooves, the lock groove is actually able to be pressed in the record, or somebody has to go in there and like with a razor or something and
it's done in the master cut.
Mm.
And then from that point you're just making pressings. So when if you're cutting a master or a dub plate, either or, you that's the point that you would do the lock groove. And the thing is that so when a record's getting cut, you put it on a platter, you put a blank disc on a platter, and the cutting stylus is coming horizontally, parallel, I should say, parallel, like rather than on a tone arm, which is kind of going in an arc shape, that, you know. And so what you're doing is like you're gradually to get all the different lines on this one here. Each one of those lines, it's cutting at a steady rate, and then just to give the line, he just nudges it on a little bit, like the mechanism just moves on a little bit faster than usual, and that's what gives you that visual line. And to do the lock groove, you kind of do the opposite. You stop it from moving in, and then you just let it cut one revolution, and then you quickly lift it. So there's a real art, there's a real technique to it.
Oh wow!
Tick. So, because if you recut the same bit of groove, you're likely to distort the sound quite badly. So there's a real element of timing to it. Wow. Every record pressed has a lock groove. It's just you don't normally put sound in it. Like, you know, if you leave a record to play when it gets to the label, yeah, you hear it go tick, and then it plays forever on the silent bit.
So it doesn't hit the sticker in the middle. Oh wow.
Yeah. It's just standard practice to finish a record like that, so you don't ruin your needles. But like putting sound on it has always been a bit of a trick, you know. And people have been doing it forever, you know. Well, for a long time. Like they've definitely been doing it since like the '60s. Monty Python famously did a joke where it ends up on the record just playing forever. Lou Reed did a lock groove in the '60s or '70s. Definitely a few bands, you know, knew that the idea was there. And
what about when you guys are writing on it, and like when it's like scratch lores written on it, and the names and the
that's the etchings. So that was a long project where Leighton was doing etchings on his records, and they looked amazing. On the Manowar record, it's got like mushrooms going around the outside of the label, and it was like, how did you get that lined up? And he's like, well, I manually did it. He like gets a stencil, and then he like, this is on the master copy, so like you cut a record, that's on like a piece of lacquer, and they're really delicate, so you can't really play them, but they're the best material for cutting to. And then you make metal molds of that. You put it into like a galvanizing system, and you make a perfect metal copy of it, and from there you make stronger versions of that, and press into hot plastic. That's how you press them. So once you've got that metal master, that's when Leighton can go in and put an etching on. So what we did is like we got our logo made in various different sizes, and when he gets the metal work, he just checks it in the light and he sees where the 12 o'clock point is, and he tries to line it up on the 12 o'clock point, and does it that. Like you'll see, like some of them drift a bit. It's really hard to get it right with the stamper because it's quite hard to see. But he's generally pretty accurate with it, and most of the times that we've done a logo, it's been like bang on where the sound starts, which is really cool. And with the Scratch Lords idea, we wanted to do something special for that record anyway, and I've been wanting to do this like idea of an etching with the sound that follows the sound, because like I used to like draw on my records. Like I'd see the Scratch Pickles did it, you know. I thought it was so dope. Like they draw on the records, like in the run out area. And I was like, one time I had one record that I didn't like the beat. I've done it on a couple of them. Like I drew on the outside, the first beat, you know, I just drew letters on it that were sort of geometric. And on one of them, you could actually put the needle on the R in the fresh, and like I'd drawn it so they lined up. So that was always the dream, was to like make a record that had like words or pictures that actually lined up with the sounds, you know, like what the visual vinyl guys ended up doing, you know. Like I'd always wanted to do something like that. The picture disc idea was definitely one of the ideas, but I was like, it's dope, but I was kind of like more fascinated by the idea of actually having it on the grooves. And I knew that was kind of impossible, but I was like trying to think of ways it could be done or trick our way around it. I'd seen some that had etchings over the grooves from the 80s, and I've been trying to figure out how they did that. It's part of the way with figuring that out, but it's getting that done, even if it can be done. I'm sure it can be done now, but it's pricey. Like it's so expensive to do that. But that would be really dope, is have actual etchings over the grooves. But short of failing that, I was looking at this other technique that like you actually scan in an image and turn it into a sound wave based around a spiral, and then you play that.
You guys have,
and then it comes back out. Oh no, it's like the opposite of those stickers. I mean, those stickers were the idea, you know, on the combinations from the Masters album cover. That was the idea. We were like, yeah, get the sound waves, turn them into a graphic, and somehow get that onto the grooves. And it was always just like way too expensive to do it. You know, if we wanted to do it as a picture disc, we'd have to get impressed in another country. We weren't really happy with doing it, and like it was just all just like crazy money. And we're like, I'd rather go with like black vinyl than know it's going to sound good. You know, like we'd had a couple of bad experiences with pressing different colored vinyl and stuff as well. So we were like, sometimes it comes out good, sometimes it comes out bad. So we were like, okay, from now on, whenever we do a pressing, we always do the first pressing in black. So we know it's going to sound good, you know, and then if we do any extra represses or something, we might do colors. But yeah, with the Scratch Lords one, we ended up, there was a few techniques that we looked at doing. One of them was like called groove graphics, which a guy in the States came up with, a cutting engineer in the States comes up, and you actually cut the image using sound, and you can see it, but you can also play that sound. But it's a horrible sound. It's like, it's horrible squealing noise. But yeah, Todd at Deep Grooves Mastering, I think, is the guy that came up with that. Or was it Epic Center Brian? I can't remember. He's one of the cutting engineers in the States. He's a really experimental guy. I think it's Todd. And you can get that done. You know, you can get him to cut your record. You can send him an image, and you can get a thing cut. But we were just like, for us, like the trade-off of having such a horrible noise and people like wondering what the hell to do with it. We were kind of like, meh. And it was very complicated for us to get Todd to cut it, send it to the UK, get it pressed. There was this whole thing. So in the end, I just designed the logo. I think I've got it somewhere. Yeah, here it is. Look, I printed it out on just a bit of A4, just with the dimensions.
Oh, nice.
And I sent it to Leighton, and I was like, look, man, I want it so that the S from Scratch Lords lines up with the bit, you know? And that was the plan, but unfortunately, he got the alignment slightly wrong. And fair play to him, because it was really hard to see what to do. It still works, but it doesn't line up with the words. I actually put one of the samples in there. It's got a guy going, the LORDS, yo, spelling out the Lords, and each syllable lined up to the LORDS on the Scratch Lords thing, but it never came out. So I was always gutted. But it did work on the 7-inch. If you look at the 7-inch, I recalibrated the letters so that they fit onto the BPM that the 7-inch is at. It's a slightly different BPM. So they're rearranged slightly, the letters, and they each line up to when he says the LORDS. And there's little like samurai icons around the outside. There's 10 of them, and they all line up to one of the 10 syllables on the 7-inch record.
Nice.
That was always the plan with the 12, but it didn't come out quite as nice. But it's still the visual effect of it, just having the writing there, being able to put your needle on it, and like normally you've got the cue light there, so you see it flashing. That was the whole idea, and it worked brilliantly. And like people were just like that looks dope. It doesn't matter what's on it. Like I'm really happy with how the record came out as well. But like the visual thing was definitely like it was exactly what we were trying to say. You know, it kind of like looked really dope. It was really raw. And it was even kind of useful because you could like use it for like hydroplanes and you know, grippy stuff that was like a nice little bonus.
Yeah, some extra textures. Nice, yeah.
Yeah. But people definitely recognized it and noticed it. And I remember that record was probably one of the fastest selling.
Wow.
The original pressing, the black pressing of the Scratch Lords record, that sold out very, very quickly. And the same with the 7-inch. That was one that it didn't. I mean, it was kind of surprising. You know, we were expecting it to go. You know, we knew we'd hyped it, but quite how quickly people were like, "Give me that shit," was like that was a good, really good release, really good vibe. And then we did, of course, we did like the Russia tour as part of that. So that whole thing was like a very long plan. You know, I mean, the first Scratch Lords record was actually backtracked one that wasn't on cut and paste. It was just like done independently, you know, through the Community Scratch crew, and backtracked the arrangement. Jimmy basically released it through his label, and that was supposed to be just like a raw, dope as fuck, you know, loud scratch record that would be like scratch record of choice if you just want to battle or just, you know, and that's how it serves for me. You know, it's definitely one I just reach for. And it's just like, I want awesome noises, just grab that one. If I want to do something a bit more intricate, that's what the second Scratch Lords record was about. You know, the Power Police Resistance was about having a whole album's worth of stuff, but it's just not made yet. You could just make, you know, there's drums on there, there's weird noises on there, there's tones, there's lock grooves, there's weird little samples off the radio, and there's skipless sounds with dope vocals, you know. So that's what it was about, and it really came into its own. Like when we did the Russia tour and we went with the record, and it really just felt like we only needed that one record, and we didn't have to talk to each other about. It was just me and Jimmy out there at the time, but we didn't have to even discuss what we were going to try and do. It was just like, you play some dope beats, and we know what's on this record, and it worked really well. You know, we could really like communicate with each other without having to plan it or whatever. You know, so. Yeah, and that worked with the other gigs as well. Like when we're doing it with all of us with Scratch Lords, and that's part of it. You know, it's like making it so that we've got all of these, you know, all the cut and paste records. We want it so that it's like you can just grab one or two and and they'll see you through a whole gig.
Exactly.
Non-stop scratching if you wanted to, and that's the same. The modus operandi guys. You asked about that, and they're kind of like. They've got their own separate thing really, because Red Mist was the first record we put out, was the Improvise Wisely, and that was like a next level thing for us because we really went in on that. You know, he wanted to do the instrument record really badly, and I was like, I really want to do something like that, but you know, he's already got the dope instruments. You know, I wasn't as good with the samples. I didn't have them ready to go like he did. He was like, he just wanted some help with the arrangement. Basically, he got the idea, but just wanted to, you know, again, some finesse on it, I guess, with just like the actual technical side of it. And we worked on that a lot, you know, like we ripped it apart, put it back together, and tried lots of different versions. It took us like a year. It was worth it because it came out just like so functional, you know, like we both just, you can see where the sounds are, you can literally see them, and it's just like such a clear grid. And it came in really useful. We were both making loads of tunes out of it, seeing other people making tunes out of it, and that was great. And at the same time, you know, like he was definitely well known in the South American and the Chilean scene. You know, he was big in the battling, and then between him and his crew with Modus, you know, like FSO had been doing some really innovative turntablist stuff for years and years. You know, like he was on early CSG tapes, CDs and releases, and had been doing his own thing for ages and doing weird stuff that, you know, that it was all him. It wasn't just like, I'm just doing this to enter a battle or a Red Bull or something. It was like, I'm doing this because I want to make some art, you know, and so he was someone we were paying attention to. And so those guys were like a crew, and they were like, when we did a tour, the first tour that Cut and Paste did, the first Cut and Paste tour was Scratch Blast, and we went around the UK And we tried to get all the Russian guys over, but we could only get a couple of visas for the guys. So we found 01 and Noka came over. And the Modus guys were like, we want to come as well. And we were like, dude, like, I think we'd already started on Improvise Wisely, but I was just like, man, I would absolutely love that, but I definitely don't have the money for like 4 tickets, I think it was, from Chile to the UK, you know. I was just like, and visas and stuff, like, you know, we were already totally killing ourselves getting the Russian guys over. Like, it was a lot of money with like visas and everything, you know, it was quite difficult. And so we were like, man, I'd love to. And they were like, oh, no, you don't have to pay. Like, we want to come. Like, we just want to come. But like, is that cool? And we were like, yeah, like, definitely, you know. So they made their way. We did the tour. We just expanded how many vans and stuff we were hiring. And like, I'd only just learned to drive. Like, it was literally my first journey in a car. Was going on a tour with like 7 people in the back and like, going up and down the country. But it was such a great adventure. We really like honed our own skills a bit of like how to put on an event and make sure that things run smoothly, and like you know, deal with when the power goes out, and or like you get kicked out of the venue and you've got to go to another venue, or like, set up a gig at the last minute, where to sleep, all of this stuff. But loads of really great stuff happened on that tour. Gave us loads of ideas, made us realize what we like, that we could do those tours, you know, even though they were small. It was like dedicated crews coming to see us, and everyone really appreciated it. Just that there was something happening in their half of the country, let alone in their town, you know, because that element of things had really started dying off, you know, local stuff. It was really like once a year you get to go to one of the big events. There wasn't really much going on locally, so it was cool that we could go to these, you know, there was like local things happening. And off the back of that tour, you know, like going to Leeds, linking up with all the old heads that I used to cut with there, and then they were like, fuck, we should do this all the time. And like now they're doing like regular Scratch Sunday style events up there, and you know, that's wicked. And from that tour, that kind of helped us format the idea of like how to do other tours. And just other opportunities came up, like when we went out to LA and did the NAMM thing. You know, that was just really lucky timing that other people wanted us to come there, so we could kind of share the costs. And you know, like the American guys like paid a lot of the way for a lot of the heads to get out there, and they wanted, you know, like Oslo Flow, and you know, they wanted the guys out there and manipulate. Like they were names that they were like, we never get to see these guys do their thing in real life, like get them out here. So that was wicked. And then there was the Chilean tour was really awesome. And we spent a long time planning it. It was all going to be part of the album release and the tour release. It was all part of a big plan, to be like, let's release a tool, the guys make an album with using the tool, and we kind of use the tour both as a way to promote the album, but also as a way kind of making the album. It wasn't really finished yet, and we spent a lot of that whole trip was like almost research, really. Like we did gigs most nights. I think we did 6 or 7 gigs out of 10 days. But we also spent about 3 days just in a spot down by the coastline, just on our own, just with a studio set up, and we just spent days just like scratching with each other, just coming up with ideas, recording random stupid things that are never going to get released, but just like it was just ideas, and it all came out off the back of that record. We had that record to play with, you know. We even had the pressing. I think we had the finished pressing in our hands for the tour, so we could sell it at the gigs. We were using it at the gigs. We were making live music with it. We were making pre-planned music with it. The guys were, you know, just finishing their album and performing it. So it was really interesting time. And then we came back really buzzing. COVID hit.
Oh wow!
But we already had the idea going, so we put out the album. We were really hyped to put out an all scratch music album, and the fact that it just was genuinely such nice music to listen to, and you didn't have to tell anyone it's scratched, so you should be impressed. You know, it's like, that's just, if you care about that, then you can nerd out about it. But for anyone else, it's like just pleasant music to listen to, and that was a real key thing for us, that it's like, this is just good music. That's the main thing we want to get across here. And yeah, those guys are just so great, and they just showed us such an amazing introduction to Chile. Chile's going through such amazing times at the moment, with the people rising up against the government and change, you know, enacting change against an oppressive government, which is like, we got to see kind of a bit of that in action, which was quite amazing. And like the feeling there, that was like everyone was on board with that, rather than it being kind of like a divided country or anything. It really felt like everyone was working together to change for the better, which is like a really interesting experience.
Very cool.
So yeah, man, that was a really cool trip. And yeah, and the Russia trip as well was just mind blowing for me and Jimmy. Everyone out there, just such dope scratches everywhere. Everyone just so hungry for it, so into it. Really welcoming for the whole Scratch Lords idea, you know, because we were like, you're never sure if people are going to be like, oh, it's not technical enough, or it's not like, I've seen someone do it cleaner or whatever. It's always really good positive feedback. You know, people aren't worried about it being scrappy. It's more the energy, and that's entirely the vibe for us. You know, we're like, of course, we're not trying to be perfect. It's about making it fun. You know, it's about making it more fun. And that was totally the vibe in Russia. All the gigs and the studio sessions we had were just non-stop fun. You just wanted to carry on scratching with everyone and communicating like that, and sharing records and breaks and beats and stuff. It was just like, it was full on, yeah, really good vibes.
Totally. And so what about the future? So on the last note, what's the future of, like, for your music, future of the label? Like, what do you see for the future?
So for me, I'm finally hoping I should. I was starting to think I should do some sort of a release, because I've had this like access to a label and such people to help me out with it and inspire. So I've been working a lot on I make beats using like a loop pedal and scratching and like echo and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm trying to sort of refine that a little bit and get something together that's actually releasable. And then in the meantime, yeah, I'm just really happy to keep helping people put out scratch tools, put out my own scratch tools, and just like, yeah, keep learning and progressing. Like we're working on the next ZA record. I was hoping to have it actually announced by now, but we had an expensive problem at the factory.
Oh wow.
Yeah, the cut came out slightly wrong, but that's the one I was asking the guys to do, like really complicated stuff, and they knew, we all knew it was going to be difficult and risky, and so yeah, it's expensive, but kind of to be expected. But what we're hoping to do is release a record that really does follow that stems format and allows you to you know, use your turntables in a much more kind of free and open way, without having to kind of, part of the thing that bugs me about like the digital side of things, it opens up such amazing possibilities, but it also, from the audience's point of view, I always find myself thinking, this guy's awesome, but there's also stuff going on inside that computer, and I don't know where the barrier between that and what he's doing is sometimes, you know, like and for me that's a bit of a barrier, and I think that's kind of a barrier for even people that aren't fully switched on to what is going on with a DJ. I think there is still, like, just subconsciously there's kind of a link there that you're kind of like, okay, I think this is cool, I'm not quite sure what I'm looking at, but I think it's cool. And that bugs me a bit. I love the fact that when you watch a DJ that's, you know, especially with it, if it's like vinyl, you know, it's like actually happening, and there's like maybe even like there's an element of risk there, you know, like I guess that's part of it. So the way that we try and make the records is to kind of keep that vibe alive, of like keeping things fresh and kind of exciting, but with the vinyl format. So yeah, with like the ZA record 3, we're trying a few things to make it so it's like really is like an instrument, and anyone can kind of just grab it and use it in loads of different scenarios, and easily, you know. You don't have to, it doesn't come with like a manual that you've got to read to understand it, you know what I mean? You don't have to be qualified to use it. It's just like, it's there and you can just get crazy with it straight away. So that's kind of the main thing behind the label, and that's one of the real things we're trying to get right with the Zao Record 3. So we're taking our time with it. We're trying to get more of a, just make sure that we're supporting the musical side of the scene with our releases, you know, like that's a really important thing for us, that it's not just these tools, that it's not just creating a scene of people that only want to have scratch meets. You know, I love that that's a scene, and I love that people do that, and I love going to them and taking part, but I also think it's important that these tools that we're making are just useful for everyone, and for the DJs and the musical artists that want to use this as part of what they're doing. They're equally as useful and accessible as for the guys that are like, you know, we're scratching every day and we really want it like a very certain way. We kind of want to cater for all of those people without cutting anyone out, if you know what I mean. So yeah, that's the game plan, man. Is like we just want to keep making useful records, keep making dope stuff, keep the music alive, keep as many live events happening and going to as many live events as possible, and things like the Sample Music Festival. You know, supporting that and just traveling to meet each other. That's the thing, is realizing that all of that is possible, and you know, you don't necessarily need this whole approval from the mainstream industry to do what you're doing. Like there's enough of us to go and link up worldwide. You know, we're literally traveling to different parts of the planet and finding our mates again. You know, it's like you got the same set of interests worlds apart, and that's a really cool thing to be involved with, and to know that that's possible, that you can just, like, you know, Adam can link you in New York, and you know, we can go to Santiago, and we can go to Moscow and Tver City, and, you know, all these places, and link up with heads that are super into what, you know, you're really into the same stuff. I really like that. Sometimes, you know, we can't even talk, you know, like when the first time I went to Belarus, we could barely communicate.
Oh, wow.
With words, but we could totally talk with scratching and music, you know, like it was you could say all we needed to say. So, like, yeah, that's the thing that I'm always, like, trying to chase, basically.
Yeah, you guys are really doing a lot of important work, because you guys are also, you know, not only are you part of the culture, but you guys are actually, you know, being a foundation of, you know, and helping spread the culture, and helping, you know, expand things. Because I think 15-10 years from now, you know, when people look back at everything, you know, I feel like, because, like, you know, we were talking about skating before. I still feel like, even, you know, like, if you think about skateboarding in, like, the 1950s and 60s, when they used to have the contests and they used to go down the hills and all that stuff, it is like, and then relative to what happened by the time X Games and all that stuff happened, I still feel like turntablism is still, you know, in the Dogtown Z stage, you know.
Yeah, man, definitely.
Still, you know, so, like, all these, you know, tours and things that all of us are doing is still, like, just the beginning, you know, because it's like there's gonna be millions of more kids in the world. You know, there's gonna be so many people in the future. All these cities are gonna, like, I heard they're saying, like, Lagos, Nigeria is gonna be like 87 million people in the future, and, you know, Singapore is gonna be, you know, hundreds of millions of people. You know,
Sure.
So there's gonna be so many DJs, and I mean, there's already so many DJs, but everybody's, you know, still kind of locked in the, you know, just the general DJ culture of just kind of not doing a lot. And the more and more people learn about, you know, turntablism and the DJs as actual artists, fine art DJs, you know, it's just only going to spread. And you guys are, you know, really doing a lot of very important work as far as you know, keeping to the heart of the community. Because, like I was saying before with Turntable Lab, you know, they were there at the heart, and now they're just, like, you know, they're just making their money, and they're selling, like, you know, expensive turntables and stuff. Like, you know, they're just
kind of, I went to Turntable Lab in New York, and was kind of like, oh, this is, like, not the nerdy, like, kind of scratchy side of things that I was expecting. It's the kind of,
yeah.
Make sure you return it to its exact place in the pile kind of shop. I was like, okay, you know.
Because they used to sell my mixtapes back in the day, and then at a certain point, I was like, hey, I got my new here's my new mixtapes. And they're like, no, we're just selling our Diplo mixtapes, because at that point,
they didn't want to know about us. I was trying to say, you know, I'm all the way from England with these fucking scratch records, and you should buy them, and they were just like, nah.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't. They're like, oh yeah, we started. That's how they started. That was their core original thing that they started. But now, they don't need the scratch community, and that's why it's great for you guys to, keep things alive, because a lot of, uh, like, let's say, pick Dirt Style and things like that. Even Mr. Dibs and people like that. A lot of people stopped making new stuff. I mean, of course, with Dirt
I
Style.
see Dibs working a lot on other stuff, like making beats and stuff. He's
Uh-huh.
not putting out so many records, I guess, but like I think he's just kind of shifted his focus a little
Mhm.
bit, maybe. But like, yeah, I mean, that was definitely something for us. Is like someone's got to be keeping the scratch records thing alive. Like, there's definitely more work to be done in terms of the what we can do, the accuracy of them, the techniques, and the ideas. Um, but then there was also just this idea, like I kind of really respect the industries and communities that do things themselves. Just get it going anyway, um, despite there not being like a market that some big investor is going to want to put loads of
Right.
money behind. It's just like, yeah, but okay, maybe it's not going to be the next McDonald's, but like not everything has to be. Like there's still definitely like millions of scratches.
Exactly. Millions of.
But in a world where like all your graphs are supposed to just endlessly go up, obviously it doesn't make sense to anyone that lives in that reality. But it's like that's not the be all and end all. We all know that there are like these scenes that exist anyway. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and also they don't all have to constantly be reinvented with technology.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not like people had to you don't have to have a Wi-Fi connection to make your guitar work. A guitar
Right.
still can be just a acoustic guitar. It's not like you have to upgrade them all of the time. DJ technology, it's almost feeling that way, that it's sort of like, oh, don't get left behind by the technology. And it's like, why don't we just focus on like what the pure elements of it are and make sure that they're still catered for, you know um and that's getting hard to do. Like turntable manufacturers, who's making good turntables now? Most of them are
Mm-hmm.
all just the same brand and not very good. Technics are
Yeah.
kind of unobtainably expensive and haven't really changed that much about what they're doing.
Yeah, no, they're totally
um
lazy. Yeah, all
you
these
don't
big
have a
companies are
Vestax
lazy.
right now. Like Reloop are kind of, the companies like Reloop seem to be paying a bit of attention,
Mm-hmm.
but they also seem to kind of want to shoehorn in a bunch of other features that go with the DVS stuff. And it's kind of like, okay, I get why they're doing it. They've probably only got limited things that they can like invest in. But I also get the impression that they're like quite happy to let scratching represent the be all and end all in terms of like the ultimate performance. If a scratcher can handle my turntables, then anyone can. That was definitely
Mm-hmm.
a selling point for Technics, but they would never sort of publicly admit it. And that's definitely the case with like modern companies. They're putting out this gear that's really dope, but then it's more about the features than the lasting quality. And I really don't rate that, because I don't think that we should be making stuff that's just destined for landfills the whole time. I think we
Right.
should be making stuff that's like really is reusable and modifiable and dismantleable and fixable and everything. Um,
And speaking of,
I'm
you're talking about mods and stuff. I feel like, because like I was saying before, in the late '90s, I kind of got out of hip hop and got more into like all the IDM stuff that was happening. And then, but then by the early 2000s, I realized, well, I think I like the IDM stuff so much because I like turntablism so much. And I feel like now turntablism is actually at the forefront of IDM, because I feel like a lot of the stuff, like, if you hear like an IDM kind of record from 20 years ago and you hear one, from 3 years ago, it's like, hey, this everybody's still tweaking the same cutoff, and everybody's still tweaking the same types of effects. And even with like my homies that have the big modular setups, everybody's still kind of plugging in similar things that people were doing 15, 20 years ago. But then with turntablists, the sounds that are happening with turntablists are still totally new. Like even with, Hair and Horror and them, and people just, like even Maria Chavez, people breaking up records, and there's so many new sounds that are still being created from turntabling. I feel like the electronic world kind of like, they don't look at us. So, and they've kind of like peaked. They've kind of like, because the gear is like, it's like, oh yeah, how many, you got these plugins, like, oh, I got this, bit crusher, I got this crazy reactor patch, and even reactor, like in Max MSP, there's amazing things you can do, all those things, but even those things have kind of peaked out because they're not even trying to make a lot of turntablist stuff, because with sample manipulation and all that type of stuff, there's so many more parameters of sounds that you can get with just
yeah, it's a bit like the lo-fi hip hop thing. Like, people ended up wanting to make lo-fi hip hop when lo-fi hip hop used to just kind of be a natural just offshoot of like,
exactly,
well,
yeah.
I don't have a studio, so I'm making it on this. And then like people were like, no, I want that sound. I want to do it like that. And it became this whole thing. Yeah, exactly. It's almost like its own genre, and it's like, I can easily imagine a lot of the guys that made like the iconic stuff on like a 303, like maybe when they actually made it, maybe they didn't even want to admit that they were doing it on a 303. Like, it might not have been the thing to be proud of. Like, be like, oh yeah, I made it on a whole studio.
Right.
So like, it's a perspective thing, and I think that you're right. If a lot of the gear driven sort of genres almost are kind of, it does feel a bit circular, doesn't it? And I think that's a bit like what's going on now with like battling in turntablism, and there's a big discussion about whether the routines are being made for the competitions, or if they're really pushing the limits, or if it's just this endless feedback loop and not really making anything new. So yeah, definitely something to kind of be aware of and think about. It's something to think about when you're doing your own stuff. It's like, what am I actually doing? Am I saying, what do I want to say? What do I want to do? Like, if you want to get just as good as whichever DJ, like that, okay, that's cool. But like, just remember when you get there that like, then you'll sound like them. And then what? Like, what do you really want to do with it? Like, some people don't want to do anything with it. They're just like, it's like a hobby that they want to keep up practice, like, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, people do like martial arts and stuff without wanting to necessarily fight the world to death. Like, that's not necessarily the goal. So
exactly, or golf.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You don't have to be the best. Yeah, what are you trying to be the best of? Like,
exactly. And that's what's great about the portable stuff, is that it's just like having a sack of golf clubs or something. It's just like, hey, I can I can pay $100 and I can start scratching. I don't have to
totally
$500 and borrow money or wait for months and work for months or whatever. So you can just kind of,
or committing to this whole, like, a whole lifestyle of it. Because for some people it's kind of like, oh, now I've got to be a DJ. And they might not necessarily want to get into that, or it's just like, that's such a massive undertaking that they get put off. So yeah, definitely things like the portablist scene are kind of helping make that it's accessible, isn't it?
I'm telling you, I guarantee the electronic world is going to start copying the turntablist world, because they've already run out of options. Like, they've already flipped vocals, and some, like the auto tune stuff was new decades ago, and people have, I feel like they've kind of maxed everything out. Like, it's like, as far as what you can do with just a sampler and a keyboard and knobs and switches and all the common effects and stuff that are out there, it's like all these things that the turntablists are doing. Like, even with like, let's say you take RZA, and you, like, remember that song he had? I don't know what it was, maybe one of Ghostface albums, and it was like and he like had the sound of the record being pulled back, like stuff like that. I feel like that's kind of more of the future of music, because all the melodies and all that stuff, it's like, yeah, that's easy, everybody's doing all that stuff, but things that you can't do with the drum or a synthesizer. I mean, you could do it with a synthesizer, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there's
got a kind of human sound to it.
Yeah, there's thousands of, because even with the Matrix stuff, there's thousands of ways to flip sounds that have never been done on beats before, really. Like, except like that, like the RZA thing I was saying, or some old school stuff maybe, or even the Mixmaster Mike, Beastie Boys stuff you were talking about, like, because that's one of my favorite rap tracks of all time, and there's still never been an album that's all like that, like an album with turntablists and rappers actually working together, where all the beats are actually just scratch beats.
and that good as well, you know, like, I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
that track had just so much energy to it, the way that the lyrics worked with it as well. But just, I mean, both versions were great, but the video version just had so much energy to
Yeah,
it.
it's
And the
like
fact that you
like
just
it's crazy.
saw it, yeah.
Like so
And the whole weird build up where they're like,
International Mike and Beastie Boys all together, it's just like the highest level, you know?
and it was just so real. Like you see him like buzzing to get in the building, and like it takes him
Right?
like 10 minutes to get down the stairs, and they're waiting,
Yeah.
and then he just does it like and perfectly, and you're just like, okay, like these guys are the realest of the real. Like, there comes a point where it's like beyond just practicing. You know what I mean? It's like that's they're doing it to the point where like you can just do that. And that was something that, you know, I still like watch a lot of Beastie Boys live shows. Like I never actually saw them live, but I saw them. I would watch the videos of performances, and I remember them saying once in an interview about how like they don't necessarily know what Mike's going to throw at them on the decks. They know that they kind of agree tempos and stuff like that and vibes, but they've just got to keep their lyrics going back and forth between them all over the beats that Mike's going to put out, and they just trust him to drop a beat on beat, you know, and he trusts them to keep rapping on time. And I just love that idea that you can be that skilled and that confident with your skills to rock a stadium to that level, you know, like that's really amazing. Takes a lot of, it must take a lot of work, you know. You must be able to practice that much and have that extra vibe where you just like you really believe it that much that you can do it, you know, like and so like that's something to like look up to, definitely.
And do you have any words of advice for young aspiring turntablists out there?
Words of advice is just keep doing it your way, keep doing your own thing, and yeah, don't get too influenced by what's supposed to be going on, what you think the scene is supposed to be telling you to do, because most of that's a bit of an illusion, I found. You know, I've always spent ages trying to do the right thing. Oh, am I doing this the right way? Is it the official way? And then you realize that like everyone's kind of on that tip trying to work it out, and like, is this okay? You know, like we're all just there figuring it out. You know, that's
an
what people are
important
doing
key word,
together.
illusion. You're right. Most of the industry is an illusion, you know.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I'm convinced of that. Like I used to think it was so like that there was like someone that knew. And it's kind of like there are people that have a very good idea and they have better tools than you, but like at the end of the day, like they're missing massive things that really are happening. Because if you start paying too much attention over here, you're going to miss what's going. This is natural, isn't it? You know, like yeah. And this is just the scratching thing is just a perfect example of that. That there are just so many like creative, you know, super creative, super intelligent people working on these ideas that apply not just to, you know, like for me the idea of scratching can apply to other things, you know, like the idea of just like messing with stuff, repurposing it and making it into something else. Like I'm sure it's a good idea in other parts of your life, you know, like and the concept of scratching, reinterpreting things, you know, it shouldn't, you're not doing it right. You should never have been doing it in the first place. You know, the whole thing is an accident. And that's what's great about it to me, is that it's like creativity can come out of that still. So yeah.
Exactly. It was great having you on, man, and definitely got to have you on in the future. You have the scratch floors on in the future. Could get like a multi-person Zoom thing on, you know, it'd be dope.
That'd be cool, man. Yeah. Hear the other boys' perspectives on it all would definitely be interesting.
Definitely.
Those guys have all just got so much to say, so much, and such important contributions to make. So yeah, definitely hit those guys up, and the Modus boys as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, no, thanks a lot. It's been really good talking to you.
Oh yeah, totally, man. And the last question I have for you is, who are your maybe like top 5 DJs right now that you check for, as far as like yo, he's sick, he's killing it right now?
Oh man, there are too many to name. There's so many.
I mean, not like old school, not like inspirations back in the day and people like that, but just like now, like
people that are currently just like buzzing. I mean, I'm still for years now, and I still am. I buzz off of Cutmandu's cuts. He cuts on the tape machines, and he kills it on the turntables as well. But yeah, really inspirational guy. And Kamilix as well is also very inspirational for me.
Yeah, I checked for him. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really talented scratcher, and completely unique how he's learned how to scratch. And he does it despite all sorts of shit. So like, real massive respect for him. Who else is that? Man, there are so many good scratches. Like, I try try and avoid all the obvious names that everyone's gonna list anyway. I mean, the guys we're working with like do genuinely really inspire me all the time. You know, all the CSG, all the guys that rock at CSG. You know, the guys in the scratch lords, like, we all inspire each other. You know, like I'm blown away by what Jimmy and Jim and Jack do daily. You know, NMCP as well, and Modus. You know, like those guys are doing some next level turntablist stuff. The harmonics that they're working on, the way that they're achieving it in a very like free-form way, is just really amazing. Really instrumental, using the turntable as an instrument, and not relying too much on like plugging loads of extra tech into it. It's like, how do we do this? You know, like a band. We want to be a band. That's what their whole thing is about. We want to be a band. We just happen to use turntables. And the NMCP guys, I take a lot of inspiration from, because yeah, they sum up the whole DIY thing beyond. You know, they are next level.
Part of them, or he's not?
Sorry?
Chin Machine, one of them? Part of them?
No, they're friends. They know each other very well. But no, Chin's on his own tip. NMCP, he's based in Moscow, but Chin goes all over the country. He's very like successful touring DJ, as well as being an awesome scratcher and battle winner and everything. NMCP are based out of Tver City, and which is like north of Moscow, and has its own like long history of like really dope music and other it's got its whole own scene. And they just like, yeah, they built their own cutting lathe from scratch. They make their own records, they make their own beats. You know, that they've just got their whole. I could listen. In my head, they're like a genre of their own in my head. You know, like I've got like a whole NMCP part of my head. So yeah, they're a definite inspiration. So that's really dope as well, to be like working with people that are like genuinely inspiring me, and like, you know, like I genuinely mean it. Talking to Diego from Red Mist from Modus Operandi. And I was just like, man, this is so dope, because it's like, you guys are like my favorite band. Like, they actually are, and I get to hear their stuff first, you know. Be the first to hear it on vinyl and stuff, you know. Like, that's a real privilege. So yeah, that's really cool. But yeah, there are so many dope heads out there. I can't even name them all, because the scratching, the level that people have got to now is just insane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I've got to give a shout out to all the guys that I cut with every day on Turntablist World. You know, we throw ideas back and forth all the time, and anyone watching this is welcome to come and join us. A lot of really dope ideas have happened through that community, and there's definitely like, there's a crew of I don't know, like 20-30 heads that are like long time regulars. Control X.
That's turntablesworld.com, or what is it? Because
it's tinychat.com/TTW, I think. Okay. Or maybe /runes TTW. It's something like that. But if you look, there's a group for it on Facebook, like the Turntablist World. I'm sure Richie links to it through his web shop. Yeah, Turntablist World, Tiny Chat, those two things should get you to it. And yeah, it's just like, it's a video chat thing. It's a bit like this, but we just take it in turns to show each other a routine or scratch or whatever. So yeah, but it's great because people come from all over the world. And we get to chill out and make stupid fart jokes at each other and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a really cool community, and those guys, yeah, I was going to shout some of the guys out, like yeah, Vitali and Richie Roughtone, Christian Dominguez, Control X, MLP, Motec, Sammy Drums, Mevok from Finland, Kitty Cuts, you know, all of these guys are like regularly in there with us. There's loads. I'm sorry if I'm fucking missing heads out, but like you know, we inspire each other every day, and that's really cool to keep things moving, and all of that feedback goes into all the stuff that I do, and I'm sure all the stuff that they do. So like that is definitely a little hotspot of like activity, at least, you know.
Sick. All right, that was great, man. That was really, really dope. Really dope. So, like I was saying before, I'm gonna chop it up, Vlad style, and him.
Yeah, definitely, man. I've been rambling on for hours, so
Yeah, no,
definitely
this
chop
is
out all
great,
of my
man.
boring shit.
This is all history. This is a whole. That's a whole documentary. That's all history.
Yeah, sick, man. No, it's dope talking to you, man. And yeah, it's cool that we're able to like do this, you know, like it's
Sure.
just so instant now. You can just phone a dude in New York.
Right. Actually,
How's things
I'm in
there?
Atlanta right now. I go back and
Oh,
but yeah, right now I'm in Atlanta. Yeah.
okay, yeah. I was gonna say New York in particular is like pretty messy right now, right?
Oh yeah. Like out here, it's like totally different. But yeah, New York is it's crazy there because everybody. You know,
And how's Atlanta? You know, just sort of there's been a lot of like political upheaval, and I think Atlanta's been a bit of a hotspot. Has it been all right, or?
it's just you know, it's more the people being out of work and stuff like that. It's more just like you know, those people that have lost their jobs, and you know, a lot of people have been on unemployment, and now the unemployment's about to run out, kind of thing. So it's like, what's about to happen next year? It feels like there's probably going to be some type of financial collapse or something next year. You know, just because it's like, you know, they've been, you know, governments around the world have been able to like put money into, you know, supporting all the losses, but you know, it seems like that's probably going to have some type of bigger ripple effect in the future. You know.
The thing that blows my mind about it is the whole idea of it being expensive to be poor is a phrase that I've heard. You know, because often if you're in a situation where you've not got much cash flow, you end up having to do like lots of expensive things to, you know,
Exactly.
like traveling further for work, for
Getting
example.
checks cashed at a check cash spot.
Exactly, yeah. All of these things that add up and actually make your life way more expensive. And you know, I can only see that getting worse in this situation unless there's a big rethink of how to kind of distribute all these billions of dollars that seem to be floating around
Yeah,
some
universal
people's
income.
pockets.
It
Just
might
not
be the
everyone.
future. Universal basic income might be the future, you know?
Seems to make a lot of sense, doesn't it? But
Yeah.
a lot of people seem scared of it. But yeah, man. I mean, I just how are we expecting to keep 7, 8, 10 billion people fed? You know what I mean? Like, how are we going to do that if we
Could be a new,
really care about each
yeah,
other like we say we
2
do?
years from now, there could be some new sickness, or 2 months from now, it could be some new sickness. Because they are talking about, there's some new thing popping. It's just like, yo, people, you know, it can't be just everybody for themselves. Obviously, it's like, obviously, if they're, you know, that's what's, you know, social programs in general for it, so that if things get destable, but obviously things are getting even, you know, things are a lot more volatile. So it's like they're gonna have to put a lot more money into the people, you know, give people the money back, you know.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think it's a crazy time. It's interesting seeing what's happened with America over the past few years.
Mm-hmm.
What led up to like Trump and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it was kind of almost an inevitable conclusion. You know,
Mm.
of like in a sick way, I always see him as like he is the American dream,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
that's what's
yeah.
scary about it is
That's why they're voting for it.
that
Like, hey,
yeah, like everyone's like, yeah, anyone can be anything they want to be. You could be president one day, and it's like that means assholes can be president. You know
okay,
that,
no
right?
experience. No need experience. No experience.
Yeah, like if you really genuinely want to get along with everyone, you've got to get along with assholes too. Like, and that's like the ultimate conundrum, isn't it? But yeah, it's interesting times, man. I would be a lot more negative about it if
Mm-hmm.
we hadn't started this year with that Chile tour.
Oh, nice.
That was some amazing shit. Seeing
Great.
the unity with
Mm-hmm.
people on the street level, and like compared to like the hype from the news and how we were perceiving it as another country,
Mm-hmm.
and actually going there and having friends there and having a few different perspectives, and it was like, actually this is amazing what's happening, because people are realizing what it would mean to have a country work for them, rather than like just having it as this overarching like power above you. It's kind of like, no, we're like all in this place and we've got to make it work. And so like that's definitely the driving force going on there. It'd be really cool to see if it you know, if it comes out as with a positive outcome rather than just being shut down with violence, which is what they're trying to do, you know. But it really does seem like they're chipping away at that. So
they're dealing with a lot of inflation out there, right?
pretty crazy inflation. Not quite as crazy as like Venezuela
Yeah.
or somewhere that's like properly pretty fucked.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I understand it is that they've like for a long time had been a very successful economy, but it very quickly got distributed to like a small group of people at the top, and then everyone else got kind of like left with the dregs. Overall, the economy was big, but being run by like very few people in the country, and everyone was just like looking around, just like, hang on a sec, this is stupid. Like we all work, we all, you know, and on top of that had these like really strict harsh police, you know, got really violent strict police, and so people were just having enough of it. It was just like this is not the country we want to live in, and like we have the right to say no, we have the right, you have the right to say no. And so yeah, that's interesting watching it happen in Chile, watching it happen in America, and come up against with all these crazy resistance against, like, you know, what does it mean to be free and in control, and you know, like all these crazy conundrums that people seem to get themselves into. We've got the same thing going on in the UK, you know, like they want to do they're doing Brexit, and like it's like pretty much split half and half who actually wants to do that, you know, and there's very different understandings of what it even means. It's kind of terrifying, but it's also kind of interesting to see the change in action. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, but yeah, things are changing quick. Yeah, so we don't know what's gonna happen next year, but you know,
yeah, man.
Turntables, we're chilling.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the funniest thing about this. I mean, I'm trying to make sure I stay like healthy and fit and go out and walk and stay healthy and stuff. But like other than that, it's like, yeah, it's funny with the turntablist thing, and we're just like, man, we're all such cave monsters anyway. Like half of us are just like, what's changed? Like we're all just, I just stay at home all the time anyway. Exactly. None of us have gigs.
We're in the future, right? Not everybody.
Yeah, but I'm hoping that, you know, yeah, it will come out the other side stronger, because, you know, we were kind of ready for it, and we're definitely a group of people who are happy to look at things differently and deliberately change things up, and we're used to working in difficult conditions.
Exactly. Yeah. Working together.
So,
yeah,
totally. Something that unites the scene. So yeah, hopefully that'll be like a strong point on the other side.
Yeah, exactly.
As we rebuild.
Yeah. All right, man. So that was great, man. That was it. That was good. All right. So that's another episode of TTM Chat. All right. So shout out to everybody that's watching. All right.
Yeah, big ups, guys. Thanks for having me, Ray.
Okay, man. Peace, man. All right.
All right, dude. Take it easy, man. Good to speak to you.
All right. So let's see. All right.